when you transmit something over fiber optic, you get pretty much, with the exception of conversions on one end or the other, you get the speed of light. But we can transmit across copper, which most people tend to wind up doing. All your big networks that you're connecting to are copper networks. You're limited to about a third the speed of light with the resistance of the wire. You can't get over that. You can't overcome this. If you're bouncing it off a satellite, you're limited by the physical distance that you have between you and that satellite and back to Earth. There's no way to overcome that unless you start doing quantum entanglement at some level.
Microsoft can do it.
So I think the cloud gaming aspect is dangerous to try to go in that direction. But I'm curious how mobile gaming will go, because now we've got your Stream Deck out. Asus is now releasing
a stronger version,
PC-based version of a gaming system. You have the Nintendo Switch that's a self-contained gaming system. All these things can hook up to a TV system. Yeah. Is that the interim until we can correct the shortcomings of the networking or for cloud gaming?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I mean, we're getting the Switch 2. People are thinking maybe 2024, 2025. The Steam Deck and what was the other one?
Asus Ally?
Yeah, it's like the stronger version of a Steam Deck, basically. Those things are cool. I had a Steam Deck for about a week before I returned it. It's just not for me. I think it depends on the kind of gamer that you are. If you're somebody that wants to boot up and play a couple matches of Call of Duty and then, you call it a night, I think cloud gaming might be able to work if they can figure out the latency. Otherwise, you're going to have the 165 gigs that Warzone takes up in your console. If you want to get that intense single-player experience, cloud gaming could work for that because it's, you don't have to worry about it as much.
Sure, yeah.
And handheld, I think, is good to, if you travel a lot. I think it depends on the consumer on base to base. But I just think overall, the box, plug it into your TV, I think that's going to have the most mass market appeal and accessibility based off internet. I just think cloud gaming is going to be a hard sell everywhere around the country and the world until we can figure out a better infrastructure for the internet.
See, and I long for the days of the LAN party when I used to pack up my gaming system and take it to a friend's house or take it into work and hook up to the network. And, that was, we were playing, I think, Quake back then. Mm-hmm. That was paradise to me. You took it with you. Wasn't quite as portable as they are now.
No.
But you didn't have to worry about the latency issue.
Hey, but now Halo launches and doesn't have co-op at all. So it's way better now. But yeah, I think that's pretty much going to wrap things up for today, unless you had anything else to add.
No, I think that's it.
So maybe in another year or 6 months, we'll come back with another update on this acquisition, because they're clearly going to drag it out as long as they can. I want to thank you all so much for listening. Once again, I want to plug the show notes again. The show subscriptions, rather. Make sure you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast. We will be there for you. If you have any comments on today's show, you can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at insights_things. Twitch, where we are live right now. If you've got Amazon Prime, that means you have Twitch Prime. Make sure you give us that Twitch Prime sub, twitch.tv/insightsintothings. On Facebook, facebook.com/insightsintothings, at insightsintothings on Instagram. And of course, all these links can be found on our website, insightsintothings.com. Thank you all so much for listening. For Joe Whalen, for me, Sam Whalen. Have a great day, everybody.
Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow, where we take a deeper look into how the issues of today will impact the world of tomorrow. From politics and world news to media and technology, we discuss how today's headlines are becoming tomorrow's reality.
Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow. This is episode 18, Artificial Intelligence. I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and my co-host, Sam Whalen.
Hey, everybody. You believe we've done 18 of these?
18, wow. We're on a roll.
Wow. We'll get to 100 in no time.
Yeah, we kind of have fallen off of our cadence of monthly podcasts on this, haven't we?
There's just nothing to talk about.
Yeah. Well, that's what happens when you steer away from all the controversial topics.
Exactly.
So this week we're going to talk about a nice, safe topic, and that is artificial intelligence.
No dire implications with that.
So you know how this one's going to end,
Uh-huh.
folks. So is the future of AI more like HAL 9000, Skynet, and The Matrix? Or is it more like WALL-E, Star Trek's Commander Data, or C-3PO from Star Wars? Some of the world's most brilliant minds, like Michio Kaku and Stephen Hawking, recognize the tremendous potential for artificial intelligence, but also offer words of caution at its development. Is artificial intelligence the next step in our evolution, or the first step in our ultimate destruction? How will AI impact humans? How will AI impact what humans create? And could humans be entirely removed from the creative process? That's what we'll be discussing on today's episode of Insights into Tomorrow. But before we do that, I'd like to take a moment to invite our listening and viewing audience to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Tomorrow. You can find both audio and video versions of all the network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things. And we can be found anywhere you get a podcast these days: Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, etc. I would also encourage you to write in, give us your feedback, tell us how we're doing, give us suggestions on what you'd like us to talk about. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can find us on Twitter at insights_things, or on Facebook at facebook.com/insightsintothingspodcast. Are we ready?
Yep, let's get into it.
Let's go. So what is artificial intelligence? So John McCarthy, head of computer science department at Stanford University in 2007, defined artificial intelligence as the science and engineering of making intelligent machines, especially intelligent computer programs. It's related to the similar task of using computers to understand human intelligence, but AI does not have to confine itself to methods that are biologically observable.
Like a brain.
Exactly. And this is kind of a different approach to artificial intelligence than what has traditionally been the measure of artificial intelligence. And that was really something called the Turing test that was created by Alan Turing back in the 1950s. So the Turing test basically said if it's observable and convincing enough to be a human. The test basically was two people having a conversation, a third party watching that conversation, and if the third party watching that conversation, it's all text-based, can't distinguish the AI for the human, then it's past the Turing. Kind of a loose definition of what AI was back at the time there. So it was basically how well it could emulate a human being. But I think AI has changed significantly in that time, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have to, change what we define it as well. It's not just text based. It can do way more than that now. It's expanded, pretty exponentially since then.
So what is a modern take on artificial intelligence?
So we have some information here from Stuart Russell, professor of computer science at the University of California, Berkeley, and Peter Norvig. I apologize, Peter, if I mispronounced your name there. He's the director of research for Google, published Artificial Intelligence, A Modern Approach. It became one of the leading textbooks, I believe this is Norvig's book, in the study of AI. In it, they delve into 4 potential goals or definitions of AI, which differentiates computer systems on the basis of rationality and thinking versus acting. So we have the human approach, systems that think like humans, systems that act like humans as well, and the ideal approach, systems that think rationally, and then systems that act rationally. Turing's definition would have fallen under the category of systems that act like humans. And there's a little bit more here that I'm going to keep reading. I didn't realize that was part of it. At its simplest form, artificial intelligence is a field which combines computer science and robust data sets to enable problem solving. Basically, we're making these things as a sort of extra brain to help us out. It also encompasses subfields of machine learning and deep learning, which are frequently mentioned in conjunction with artificial intelligence. These disciplines are comprised of AI algorithms, which seek to create expert systems which make predictions or classifications based on that input data.
So AI right now, some of the biggest things in AI right now probably are algorithms. You know, you have the famed Google algorithm for searches, and you know they apply it to YouTube. And is the algorithm itself that basically looks at usage patterns and what you're doing online, and then determines what else you would like? Is that considered a form of artificial intelligence?
I think it would be. I mean, it's interpreting data and then I guess projecting and it's making its own conclusions based on that data and then sort of showing you that conclusion, right? So if you click on something on Instagram and you read the page long enough and you go back to Instagram, it'll have more things like that. Or it happens to me all the time because every device is listening to you all the time. You mention a product and then 5 seconds later an ad for it pops up on your Instagram, or you text somebody about it and the same thing. So it's definitely always watching and always learning.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And I think we've run into that in the house here because I've got a whole boatload of Amazon A products. I don't want to say the name because I don't want to actually activating. But that's the same sort of thing. That and Siri and what's the Android version of voice
Bixby?
assist? Bixby, is that it? So all of these assistants are some type of artificial intelligence as well. But how intelligent are they really?
Not very.
Yeah, that's kind of like none of them are thinking on their own. They all require some level of input. They all require some source of data that they go out and get. Like if you ask the Amazon devices for information on something, they'll come back and tell you a Google contributor added this. So they don't even seem to compile their own set of knowledge. So it's almost like it's more of an interface to the web than it is really an artificial intelligence. It might be an intelligent way to interface with it, but we're not talking HAL 9000.
Right. It's not learning and adapting necessarily.
Right. And it can't take its own actions or anything like that. You know, when we get into stuff like that, we might be looking at something like a Tesla or a self-driving car, where it takes input from outside sensors and has the ability to make decisions on its own at that point in time.
Right.
That's where we tend to get a little bit more down the rabbit hole of how dangerous things could be.
Yeah, once you start getting into the territory, we transition out of this into our next segment of more developed intelligence, of where that could possibly go once something starts thinking for itself.
Right. So let's take a quick break. We'll come back and we'll dig a little bit deeper into the types of artificial intelligence that are out there. We'll be right back. For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com. Welcome back to Insights into Tomorrow. We're talking artificial intelligence today. So and I don't want to go through every line that we have here, just kind of throw a few things out there. So the types of artificial intelligence that we're really kind of referring to here can be broken into two categories. One's capabilities and the other's functionalities. So under your capabilities, you've got narrow AI. And an example of narrow AI is sort of like what we talked about with Siri, where, it's also referred to as weak AI. It focuses on a narrow task. You can even classify IBM's Watson that was used for chess playing in something like this as well. It's not robust. It's not thinking on its own. You then get into your general AIs, and your general AIs tend to be a little bit more sophisticated. These are your strong AIs. You can understand and learn intellectual tasks that humans can do. So you're getting a little bit smarter with these, but the requirements from a hardware standpoint, you need a supercomputer. The couple that are listed here are two of the fastest supercomputers in the world in order to accomplish this.
Yeah, and do we know what these? We have the Fujitsu K. Do you know what those are used for? Like what type of computing we're using these like intense supercomputers for?
Most of these are being used for simulating weather, simulating nuclear explosions without actually having to fire them off. So
Oh, that's helpful.
they're highly complicated and powerful devices just to get this next level of AI.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last level of AI from a capability standpoint is what's referred to as super AI. This is where AI, this is your Skynet. This is where it surpasses human intelligence. None exist at this point in time, thankfully. But is this the direction that we're going as we're seeing this natural progression? Are we going to see super AIs?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I want that. And then you get into like the Blade Runner discussion of like what makes something human. When you give something a will of its own, like what we're getting to like deep sci-fi territory here. But I don't know if we would ever get to that point. If what would we need something like that for? I mean, maybe to like run a city, like monitor trains and public works and stuff like that on like a city level. I don't know what we'd ever need something that smart for, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I could certainly see from an infrastructure standpoint, most of what we do now, you've got positive train controls, a great example you just mentioned with trains, where if the human operator fails to make certain checks, the computer can kick in and run things safely or shut the system down safely. So there's lesser versions of that now, but I think seeing something like that on a grand scale might be something where a super AI would work. What about functionality-based AIs? Tell us about that.
So we've got the reactive machine. Reactive machine is the primary form of AI that does not store memories or use past experiences to determine future actions. It only works in the present. So an example of this would be IBM's Deep Blue chess playing computer. That thing's really cool, by the way.
Yeah.
I've seen some videos of that. It's really neat.
Gary Kasparov would differ.
We've also got limited memory AI, which trains from the past to make decisions. They do have a memory, but it's very short-lived. And an example of this would be used in self-driving vehicles, like we mentioned, Teslas, things like that. And then finally, we have theory of the mind. On the show, we like to say theater of the mind. It's kind of like that. Theory of the mind AI represents an advanced class of technology and exists only as a concept. They would require a thorough understanding of the people and the things within the environment, including understanding feelings and behaviors. There's no examples because they don't exist, but attempts at mimicking human emotion in automatons is as close as we can get.
One of the things regarding that is that people are trying to experiment with this, and and they're doing it through the same type of training that they're using for Chat GPT and the other AI engines that are out there. We'll talk more about those in a little bit. But what they're doing is they're having human beings emulate emotions, facial expressions of emotions, sadness, happiness, that type of thing. And they're having multiple iterations of people doing these. They're sticking them in a database, and then they're having a computer look at these and interpret them. So just by facial expressions, they're trying to get computers to understand emotions. How effective do you think that would be? How effective would it be for you to have no other communication method whatsoever, but just be able to see someone's face? Do you think that they would be able to convey emotions accurately enough?
I don't know. It would depend on how they're measuring it, right? Like if you're looking at like specific muscle movements for like a frown versus a smile, But everybody expresses emotion in different ways, so you'd have to have some kind of baseline to do that. And I forget the name of it. We learned it in college, but it's that thing where you show us an image of a guy's face, and it's that effect where you can interpret it however you want. Like, it's the same face over and over again, but if you interpret it as in he's happy, you can kind of see it, or he's sad, you can kind of see it. And so I wonder where you get into something like that, where it's like it's sort of a gray area of, well, is this person really happy? You know, that's when you have to go back to the baseline of if we're measuring facial tics or
Right.
certain, I don't know, visual ratios on your face.
Yeah, and I agree. And like, I don't know if I, as a person who doesn't need artificial intelligence, would be able to accurately understand emotion. Look at the technology that we've had with facial recognition already, and some of the challenges we've had, where you had, for instance, Microsoft's Xbox Series. When that came out, not that many years ago, they only used Caucasian people to train it, and African Americans and so forth started using it. The technology didn't hold up,
Right.
and it was because of the way that the technology itself was developed and trained and
The foundation of it.
exactly. So it's like, if you can't get that right, then I have a very difficult time thinking you're going to get a.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? You get into like user error at that point. If you're trying to emulate human behavior, but you don't account for the whole world, apply this in any
Right.
practical sense.
Right. And that's why you'd almost have to think you need multiple forms of input: voice inflection, body, the micro tics that people have. I could certainly see you coming up with enough data points to infer what emotions are, but you need to have those data points there, and it has to be more sensors than just trying to read someone's face.
Yeah, and do we need this? Why would we need this?
Right. And that's another point. You know, one of the implementations that people have talked about with this is customer service. You know, they had the one hotel in Tokyo that didn't last very long, that the front desk was entirely run by automaton.
I'm sure that was a blast.
And it was because they thought the automatons would interact better with people than people would, which I'm not really sure why you would think that. But the problem you run into is you get into that uncanny valley scenario where people are just creeped out by it. It looks enough like a human to make you think it is, but not enough to know it is. So it made people feel very uncomfortable. But I could see in a situation like that where you're implementing emotional stuff, detection, where you want to know if someone's angry. You know, do I really need to get a manager? Are you like stuff like that, where you're interacting with
I could see that.
It's funny that they're exploring that path now, when you have grocery stores that are doing away with their self-checkout because people dislike not having a human to deal with at a register now. So it's like, I don't know if it's a cultural thing, if it's a regional thing or what, but it seems people are kind of finicky.
Yeah, I don't know. And also, it's like, is it cost effective to build a robot to talk to people than to just hire someone for minimum wage to work at the front desk?
Right. That's a
And
very good
I know
point.
the argument is that, well, the robot could do it for forever, whereas we have to worry about this person, you know, their livelihood, and, you know, they need to go to the bathroom, take a break, things like that. Robots don't have to do that. But it's like, I mean, come on.
You don't have to contribute to a 401k with robots either.
Exactly. Yeah, you just got to swap out a few parts every once in a while.
Right.
So I don't know. And the practicality is where I get hung up on of how are we really going to use these things, and are they going to be worth the effort and time we're putting in to try to figure it out?
I agree, and I think it's almost like it's a fun school project people are working.
Yeah.
But you know, the golden ring, or the prize of artificial intelligence, at least as far as sci-fi tells us, is self-awareness. Self-awareness is where the AI, they only exist hypothetically right now, and only in science fiction for the most part.
Yeah.
But these are the types of systems that can understand internal traits and states and conditions and perceive human emotions. And these machines are smarter than the human mind, which is really what's terrifying, I think, to a lot of people. They'll be able to understand and evoke emotions in those it interacts with, but it'll also have its own emotions, its needs, its beliefs. This is where we get into things like a HAL 9000 from 2001 or Skynet or something like that. I don't know if anyone's shooting for self-awareness. Is self-awareness possible with today's technology?
I was actually just thinking about that because, like, you have in here about it having its own emotions and needs, and I think it would be more terrifying if it didn't have emotions, if it was purely logical, right? Because, you make a AI and it instantly determines that humans are bad for the planet and decides to wipe us out.
Right.
Because, we could make that conclusion, but we're also, we are humans. We're not going to wipe ourselves out, intentionally. So it's like, I don't know if we would get to the point where that's possible. I don't know. I obviously don't know anything about programming, but how would we program emotion? I guess, you're seeing the baby steps with this facial recognition software, but at what point are we able to program emotions? Is it something like using a human brain as the blueprint? I have no idea where this would go, but it sounds like fantasy, but one that is close enough to reality that, maybe, but I just don't know how they would do it.
And you make a very valid point there. I think humans in general have a very difficult time dealing with emotions, recognizing emotions, and coping with them already. I don't know how you would possibly translate that into software.
No, I think it would have to be. You can't. I mean, it's all math based, right? So you can't. That's the whole point of emotion. You can't quantify it, right?
Right.
Unless you measure like heart rate, I guess, if you're angry or sweating or biological reactions. But when it gets to the thinking about interpreting emotions, I just think it's too nebulous. And if we did have a self-aware AI, it would have to be, maybe based off of personality, or it would just be purely logical.
So then we're talking something more along the lines of RoboCop. Where we take the ex-con and we stick his brain into the robot there, and that's the artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I was thinking that, or in Halo, if you guys are familiar with that, they use a human brain to then make an AI.
Right.
So the AI is like part human, kind of. Something like that. But I don't think we can do that yet, and I don't know how we would.
And you know what? I think that's probably the biggest limiting factor right now, I think, is our computing power.
Yep.
In order to produce the amount of computational power that the human brain has, you need the fastest supercomputer right now to even approach it. And I think until we get to, real practical quantum computing, I don't think we have much of a hope of even reproducing that. People, I think, don't understand how remarkably capable the human brain is.
A lot going on.
Yeah, how fast it operates, how many different things it can do at one time. And computers just haven't gotten to that point yet. Yes, computers are very good at doing the same thing over and over again, and they're very good at doing math. But they're only that good because humans make them that good.
Yeah, and it's when you get that line of what we're creating is superseding us that it's like, okay, well, maybe we've gone a little bit too far.
Yeah. Well, it's a good point where you can take a quick break and we'll come back and talk about, is artificial intelligence dangerous in its current form and future forms? We'll be right back. For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com. So Elon Musk, not Musk's, Elon Musk wrote, the pace of progress in artificial intelligence, he says, I'm not referring to narrow AI, is incredibly fast. Unless you have direct exposure to groups like DeepMind, you have no idea how fast. It's growing at a pace close to exponential. The risk of something seriously dangerous happening is in the next 5-year time frame, 10 years at most.
Where was this quote from?
So this was from Elon Musk. I didn't see
Okay.
where the quote.
I just wanted to see if we were still in the window or not.
I didn't get a date on that, but I have to imagine we're pretty close to that window.
Any day now, the robot uprising is going to happen.
Well, the fact that he made cars that are self-driving and running people over and killing them tells me right now that AI actually physically is danger.
He can make himself sound smarter by just becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So, what do you think of that? I mean, I think there's a lot of scholars, there's a lot of scientists that talk about AI. Elon Musk is a guy who's neck deep in it. He's building them. He's releasing them. You see what we do. SpaceX has rockets that fly back to Earth and land themselves. Tesla has cars that can drive themselves and park themselves and stuff. So that's real practical AI that's in the world now. How serious do you think you take this kind of warning from Elon Musk?
Not that seriously. Just because I don't see any like real world application of this idea, right? I also don't know what DeepMind is, but it sounds very scary. But I just don't think. I don't know. I feel like we would be seeing more examples of it, other than the Teslas running people over and causing traffic. But that's just faulty hardware. That's not necessarily, the AI thinking for itself and choosing to kill all humans. That's a functionality issue, right? So I don't know. I don't think it would be this quick. I just think we would see more implementation of AI in our day-to-day lives for it to then turn into something dangerous. The most I could see it being is like an over-reliance on computers and AI instead, and when then they malfunction, then you have problems like the recent airport, the what was it, the FAA systems went down, things like that, things where we have large-scale operations being run by AI, and then the AIs break, and then we have a problem.
So Musk was quoted in a separate quote comparing AI to the dangers of the dictator of North Korea. Now, yes, it's Elon Musk, so there's a lot of
Take it with a big old grain of salt.
there's a lot of self-promoting, angles that he goes through here. But we've got artificial intelligence in machines that are capable of killing people. Not designed to, but capable.
Right.
We also have it designed into devices that are designed to kill people. You've got Predator drones that are AI driven. You've got Tomahawk cruise missiles that are AI driven. You've got Phalanx Sea-Wiz close-in weapon systems on ships that are AI driven. These are machines that are built already to kill and are powered by AI. Are those potentially dangerous, or do you think we have enough control over those?
Well, I mean, they're weapons, right? So they're inherently dangerous. It would be... Again, I just think, are we shooting for the notion of them, like, rising up and, like, actively trying to kill people? Because I think it would be much more realistic for just be taken over by another human, right? To have somebody hack into them, or to have them malfunction, and instead of targeting here, you're targeting somewhere else where you're not supposed to. I just don't think it would be the AI necessarily choosing to kill a bunch of people. I think instead it would be a malfunction.
So to paraphrase, we're hoping that it's humans that are the problem,
Right.
and not the AI that's the problem.
And we can count on that.
Yeah, to a certain extent, that logic makes sense because you can count on that human factor. Like, it's very likely that you would have a foreign entity, our infrastructure here,
Mhm.
before I think you would have an AI go rogue and shut down the power grid.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Like, you're not gonna, like, you talked about the Predator missiles. Like, the Predator missile's not gonna wake up one day and go, "Hey, I'm gonna go blow up that town." Someone's gonna have to tell it to go do that. It doesn't. We're not at the point where these things can, like, actively, pursue missions or pursue goals on their own unless they're told to by somebody else, like an operator.
Put that for a second. So they're not going to rise up. You're not going to have a Skynet take over the world and nuke the entire world. But you have machines that are trusted of violence.
Mm-hmm.
If those machines can then be usurped by a nefarious third party and are trusted to continue to do their job, when they get usurped, we have a new target designation.
Right, exactly. And that's I think where you get into the real world danger of this. But I mean, that's our world in general has a heavy reliance on computers, right? And so I think that comes with the risk, right, of the ease of use and the something like AI to run it, because it's not feasible for people to do it all the time. And I think that just comes with the territory of, if this is how we're going to run things, one could take it over. It's no different than, well, it's different, but we're reducing a little bit. But if you had a gun and someone took your gun and killed you with it, it's the same thing. Yeah.
It's not the intent.
For now, yeah.
Okay.
Until we get to the point where, we have a fleet of drones that are, flying around the globe just taking pot shots wherever they want. But I'm saying, like, instead of a fleet of jets flown by pilots, if it was a fully automated, a bunch of drones where they could all communicate and make their own decisions, once they get into that level of autonomy, that's when you're running into more of an AI-based issue, I think.
So Russia's president, Vladimir Putin,
We're getting all the banner people out here today.
He said at one point in time, artificial intelligence is the future, not only for Russia, but for all humankind. It comes with enormous opportunities, but also threats that are difficult to predict. Whoever becomes the leader in this sphere will become the ruler of the world.
That's a little extreme.
First off, do you agree with that?
I mean, I guess, because at that point, wouldn't you just have the strongest army too? If it's, he says it's got enormous opportunity, right? So then by that logic, you would, unless those unpredictable threats like make it worse for you. I don't know. Like, I don't think it's any different than having the strongest standing army, right? And whoever has that, you're by default the most powerful, unless you control like the economy. That's different. But in terms of like military force, if you have a bigger or more effective army, yeah, you're going to be more powerful, right?
So, do you think that in order to combat nations, like assuming Russia's gearing up towards artificial intelligence, do you think the only way to combat nations like that is with your own artificial intelligence?
I think so. I mean, that's how these things usually go, right? Like an AI arms race, which, hey, sci-fi authors out there, that's a free title. But, yeah, I just think it's going to... And you're going to dig yourself into a hole, right? Because the more we go into this AI route, the more you're getting into these threats that are difficult to predict, like he's talking about. So the further we go with this technology, the more we're getting on that edge of accidentally making something that could either get its own intelligence or something that is more likely to be, like you said, usurped and used against the, whatever country's making it.
Okay. Now we're talking AI in actual active weapons there, but there's potential danger elsewhere too. What about social manipulation? What do you think AI could do from a social manipulation standpoint? I mean, so far we've had social media, I don't want to say usurped because it's being used as it's designed.
Right.
But you've had situations where you've got Facebook and the whole Cambridge Analytics, and you've got Twitter trying to, all the Twitter files coming out now telling us how people try to manipulate elections and stuff. Where do you think AI falls in there? Is AI, is that algorithm as you go through your social feed, is that AI manipulating you in such a way that it could be dangerous?
Absolutely. And I think that this is where you get into the things that are much more real world dangers, right? Especially when it comes to things like social media, you run into that echo chamber issue where you're only hearing ideas and things that that reinforce what you think. So you never hear anybody else's ideas, for better or worse. But generally, I think that's a bad thing. I think that you should be able to, see ideas from everybody and then interpret them how you want. But when you get into this with social media where you're seeing the same things over and over again, it just reinforces your own beliefs and makes you double down. And it makes everybody closed-minded and more isolated from each other and more extreme in their beliefs, too, in certain situations. So I think when you're getting into things like that, and like you said, the Cambridge Analytica thing where it's straight up manipulation of people, I think when those have real-world consequences, which they did and still do, I think that's much more dangerous than worrying about a drone going rogue or something like that.
Well, surely manipulating the mindset of common citizens isn't something that's unique to AI. I mean, the Nazi Germany had an entire propaganda ministry that was designed to do that. You've had this type of thing that was driven by humans for hundreds of years now. What does AI bring to the plate that makes it any more dangerous than just humans doing this type of activity?
I think it's the scale and the pace of it, right? So AI is very good at learning. That's what it does, or at least whatever. I'm talking about the algorithm in social media.
Right.
It's good at learning what you do, what you look at, and I think it can do it at a pace and with an effectiveness that humans just can't do, or can't do as fast, or on such a big of a scale. I mean, a human could look at what you do on Twitter, what you click on, what you like, but it would take them much longer to figure out, okay, well, what should I serve them next in their timeline that they'll click on, versus an AI looking at it and figuring it out like that. So I think it just makes it more effective and efficient, honestly.
That's a very good point. So the other one that they talk about is invasion of privacy and social grading. I don't know if we've never really talked about social grading in the past here. It's being done in some Asian countries already, where depending on what your reputation in social media is how you're treated in society. But I've seen this in sci-fi as well, where it's extremely emphasized in how people treat you. But from an invasion of privacy, you brought up a very good point of, well, everything's listening, and if I say something, I start getting advertisements. Is that a bad thing that you get targeted advertising?
I think it depends on how you look at it. I know people that feel like they're being manipulated. They'd rather it be not targeted and just give me what I want.
That's what targeted advertising is they give you what they think you want. Without targeted advertising, you're just going to get a bunch of crap thrown at you there. I mean, is that really a bad thing that you get targeted advertising?
I think when you, the people that have issues with it, I think they see it as of being manipulated, that even if it's something I want.
Well, advertising is manipulative.
It's true, which is why it's so effective.
That's the definition of advertising.
I know. I just think it's I think people have an issue with it because it's that invasion of privacy of, even in my own home, I'm being sampled for data and it's being regurgitated back at me so I can become a better consumer. It eventually it just feels like it's all boiling down to you just pumping money into the economy.
Okay, I'll buy that.
It is effective though if you're a business owner.
Absolutely.
From a capitalist standpoint, it's great.
Yeah, exactly. One of the other ones they talk about is misalignment between our goals and the machines. And this one, I don't know how much of a problem this was. The great example they give is you get into a self-driving cab and you say, get me to the airport as quickly as possible. Okay. But if the machine itself is doing what it thinks you asked it to do, that could involve exceeding the speed limit. It could involve dangerous driving. It could involve driving into the river that's between you and the airport to try to get you there. I think this is kind of a silly example of, I mean, this is no different than people following their GPSs off the road, Is this something we need to worry about, where if we're putting our lives in the hands of these machines at some point in time, and they're already talking about having air taxis to the airport and stuff like that. So you're ramping up the level of complexity and the level of danger associated with the reliance on these machines. Is it possible that somebody misses a line of code that says stop at stop signs? Is that a danger?
I mean, not really, right? If these things are being put out on a global scale, surely they would test them, right, and see if that's an issue. You've had some issues with this with self-driving cars where they have malfunctions, where they'll, I saw one the other day where a Tesla was in like a tunnel and just stopped, and I don't know why, and then like 8 cars hit it. So things like that will happen, but I think if you're talking about like the foundation of the code getting out there, that's something's wrong with it, I don't really think you have to worry about that. I feel like it would be extremely irresponsible of whatever company is making it to put it out there, not having it be fully vetted, especially when you're getting into like transportation and things like that.
There was one example of a Tesla that was driving on a highway at high speed, which they supposedly excel at. They're very good at that because that's how the sensors work best and the computer works best and everything.
Going fast?
On a highway
okay.
situation where they're not doing stop and go traffic a lot. And what happened was there was a vehicle that was in the left lane that this thing was driving in, and it wasn't expecting a vehicle. It wasn't expecting a stationary target. And because they use LiDAR and they use radar, and they'll gauge the distance between themselves and the next machine. And the assumption is that machine's going to be moving so we can make calculations based on timing. And what happened was this vehicle was stopped in the left-hand lane. The device, the smart car, saw that the machine was there. But because it wasn't moving, it assumed that it was a glitch in the sensor, never tried to hit the brakes, and literally accelerated right through the vehicle. And it did everything it was supposed to do based on the rules that it had. And someone had missed a rule that said, hey, there's a chance that something could be stopped in your lane. You have to stop for it.
Yep.
And that got out there after all this extensive testing. That still got out there into production. So there's a chance that you can get code that's broken out there.
That's true.
How do you deal with that? Who's liable at that point in time?
I mean, probably the company still, right? I mean, it's still their self-driving car that rammed into it. I think the onus is still on them. Even if it's something that they could never predict, then don't make the technology. If there's a chance that something like this could happen, then maybe it's just not meant to be. Or we just go through the trial and error of, potentially people losing their lives until we figure it out and put out enough software updates, if you want to look at it in like a morbid sense. But I mean, there's things
that could be a high attrition rate.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I just think maybe at a certain point, if the body count gets high enough before you hit version 4.0, maybe we just don't do it. Maybe we just stick to driving ourselves around, or we limit it to, certain public transportation options instead of every consumer having their own self-driving car.
And that's certainly a consideration to solve some of these things. And the last danger I wanted to talk about was discrimination. We had already kind of talked about this to a certain extent with
the social grading,
and with the malfunction of the Microsoft camera system for minorities. How do you think this would have an impact on society itself from a discrimination standpoint? Either facial recognition AI. We had one situation very recently in our area here where somebody was arrested and held for, I think, 48 hours based on facial recognition that was completely wrong. So it's already happening. Is that a danger that we need to be aware of? Is there checks and balances that can be put in place? Should we not be relying on AI for this type of thing?
I mean, yeah, no, we should not be. If this is gonna happen, yeah. I mean, sure, there's mix up with people getting held when they're not supposed to, and that's an issue for another day of the justice system and things like that. But I think that when it comes to things like this where you're affecting people's lives, you should probably have a double check system or like a backup to be like, okay, well, the robot figured it out, but let's just use our own eyes and see if this is the guy.
Yeah, well, and I see something like this being used extensively in high traffic areas, airports, right? So you want to be safe going through the airport, but you want to be expeditious in moving people through. So a lot of things that we do, we rely on technology to accomplish that. If you get a certain failure rate of that system itself, is that tolerable, or should that be 100% accurate?
That's a good question. I mean, if you're going to be the 99% effective and you get that 1%, there still needs to be a human element so that person isn't held for 3 days because they got the wrong person. Like, there needs to be, if someone gets pulled up on facial recognition, someone needs to look at it and or have that person come and I'm just saying there needs to still be a human element. We can't let it totally be run by the machines if they're not going to be 100% accurate.
So you need a path of resolution that
Yeah.
is human involved. And I have my own story. There was about 2-3 years ago, I got a ticket in the mail for a vehicle that I didn't even own. And it came back as a red light camera somewhere in North Jersey, which I knew I'd never even been to the town. It was like Amboy or something like that. So they send it with a picture, and you look at the picture, and there's a link to the video for it, and you look at the video, and it had, 5 characters, 6 characters on a license plate? It had all the characters on a license plate that I hadn't had of the vehicle in 20 years. And that plate was originally registered to me, but there was a glitch either on the camera or on the plate. You couldn't read one of the digits in the middle. So the AI just assumed that it was my plate, generates a ticket, and sends the ticket out to me, and I get an order to appear in court. That's AI-driven problems that you have that should have been looked at by a human being, but because of the number of tickets that they produce, you can't. The whole point of having an automated system is because you can't have a human looking at all these things. However, to your point, I was able to call them up, explain to them what it was. They were able to resolve the ticket on the phone, and I didn't have to go for the court appearance. So that system at least had that path to resolution, whereas I think as long as we have that in place, we're safe. But do you want to be that guy that they make that mistake with?
No, and that's the territory, right? If we're gonna rely on these things, and it's like it's something similar to getting on a plane or something where you're giving up a amount of control for convenience or for convenience. Honestly, if you're gonna give up that element of what you can control, then there's a risk that comes with that, no matter what it is. And I think that this is an example of that.
That just sounds like a really poor way of explaining the way airplane crashes.
Hey man, you get on the plane, you gotta expect it. All right.
We expect the least expected.
I bring a parachute every time I travel.
All right. I think we've kind of exhausted where we can go wrong with AI at this point from a danger standpoint. Let's take our last break, and we'll come back, and we're going to talk about the impact of AI on our world today and moving forward. We'll be right back. For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com. Welcome back to Insights into Tomorrow, and thank you to today's sponsor, the Second Sith Empire.
Really paid for all that airtime, huh?
They are an awesome guild. I recommend everyone look them up. Anyway, moving right along.
Hit it one more time.
Anyway, so let's look at what the impact of AI on the world today. So some quick figures I dug up here from simplylearn.com. So the revenue from artificial intelligence software market worldwide is expected to reach $126 billion by 2025. That's significant. Not huge, but significant. Gartner predicts 37% of organizations have implemented AI in some form.
I thought they'd be higher.
I would have too. The percentage of enterprises employing AI grew 270% over the last 4 years. And according to Servion Global Solutions, by 2025, 95% of customer interactions will be powered by AI.
So we got 2 years to figure that out.
That's right. And a recent 2020 report from Statista reveals the global AI software market is expected to grow approximately 54% year over year and is expected to reach a forecast size of 22.6 billion. Which doesn't really make sense because the other one was 126.
Sure does. Hey man, data's weird. They all got different conclusions.
It's numbers, right?
Don't worry about it.
I think the conclusion here is that AI is very much embedded in our lives now. Are we better off for that, or are we worse off for that?
That's a good question. We've looked at like every aspect of AI, and I think it's good in some aspects, right? We're taking the load off of humans if we can run things with an AI just to make our lives a little bit easier. I think that's a good thing because at a certain point when we're talking about things on a global scale, it's just not practical to expect humans to be able to run all that 24/7. But then when you get into the more dangerous aspects of social manipulation, we're about to get into the discussion of how it affects creative endeavors. I think that's when you start getting into the dangerous territory, and it's really going to be a question of where does this go in the next 5 to 10 years? Are we getting that full on AI integration in every day of our lives, or is it still like it is now, where it's more in the background? It's not necessarily as prominent.
And I agree. I think we're very, very much on the cusp of something significant here. I think we're kind of nipping around the edges right now until we get deeper into it. Some of the special projects that I did want to talk about, one that's in the news now, is ChatGPT. Their tagline is optimizing language models for dialogue. And this is a chatbot that is human-like interactions. You can ask it things, it'll answer them. One of the things, this happens to actually be something that I had directed my developers at the office to dig into a little bit. One of the functions that I see with this is helping to automate and personalize communication for our sales force. So the concept that we had come up with a few years back, and the technology wasn't there yet, was our salespeople know their customers. So the salespeople can go in and drop in notes. Tom likes the Phillies. His wife's name is this. His kids' names are this, and they're going to these colleges. They can put in this metadata about the person. And eventually, the idea was to have this technology that could take this metadata and write a monthly email to each one of your customers that's personalized, that might have specific information as far as offers that we might have, but it looks like it's coming from you. And we want to write these, hand them off to the salesperson, let the salesperson read it and okay it, and then send it out. And we're literally within months of being able to have the system start writing emails like that. Is that, in your opinion, is that a viable, good way of using AI, or are we stealing some of the human element there? Are we muddying the waters?
I mean, it depends on how much you care about these handwritten or emails, these personalized emails. If you're okay sacrificing the human element of it, then it's fine. It still has the human element, right? The salespeople still have to know their customers. They still have to know
exactly
the things that make it personal, and they still okay before it's sent off. I think that's fine. Yeah, I don't really have any issues with that.
But if I have a salesperson who doesn't compose emails very well,
mm-hmm.
Is it ethical for them to use this system to compose their emails for them, or is it the same as having an assistant doing it for you, or is it different because it's AI?
That's a good question. It's like cheating on homework, kind of.
Right.
But I mean, in the real world, you're not like, I don't know. It's cheating on homework in the real world isn't as big of a deal as it is in high school. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you got to make these sales, right? So if you're not good at writing emails, first off, I don't know how far you would have gotten as a salesperson. But second, yeah, it's like a tool. I think in this instance, it's like another tool to use. If emails aren't your thing, but when you're in one-on-one interactions, you can make the sale. Good for you. You can use this as a tool. If you are relying on this to do your job for you, that's a little bit different, right? If you're relying on it to make sales pitches for you and to reach out to customers, and you're kind of just sitting back and maybe putting in a few inputs, then you're relying on it too much, and it's becoming an issue because you're not doing the work.
So it's just a matter of of pacing how much you use the tool.
Yeah, and implementation.
So the next one I wanted to talk about was Canva. So Canva is a AI based image generating software out there, and there's a number of them out there now. And you basically give it text input and say, give me a picture done up like Van Gogh of a horse in a rainbow. And it'll go out there and it'll source thousands of different images, and it'll come back and it'll generate what's considered an original image for you, so you don't have to make it yourself. But that image itself is a compilation of all these other works. Is that something that is going too far, or are there any moral implications to that we have to worry about?
Yeah, this is actually the whole reason I wanted to do this episode was things like this. I know we covered the doom and gloom of AI taking over the world, but this is where I think it really is. It strikes a chord with me of it's essentially making like art sausage, but like if you didn't make any of the components of the sausage to begin with, you kind of just put it in the blender and called it your own. It's really devaluing art and the human element of it. And when people feel that they can get this app and make art like with no effort, it kind of defeats the purpose of it in general. There's also Lensa, which is similar to it. And I had an article linked here where there was cases where you could see artist signatures on the final product what Lensa would create because it was just stealing artwork from other people. And that's how a lot of these AI work, is that you put in what you want and it scours the internet and will take from other artists' pages, usually without permission. It just kind of steals it and then, incorporates it back into itself and spits it out for you, but you feel like you've made this and you really haven't. You didn't do any, you don't know how to do digital art or anything like that. It's like putting it on easy mode, but also the bigger thing is stealing from the people that did make something. And I really think it's an issue.
So let me ask you something, and we'll kind of go down the moral path here. If I don't have any artistic ability whatsoever, but I need to come up with a picture, and let's say I need a picture of a tree, and I don't know how to make a picture of a tree, so I'm going to go out and I'm going to look at other people's samples, and I'm going to find one that I really, really like, and then I go and I kind of try to recreate that as my image of a tree. Is that the same moral ambiguity as what a Canva is doing? Because Canva had the same problem. They wound up getting sued by Getty Images.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Because they weren't even pulling the watermarks out.
Oh,
It was
man.
so bad. Is me using someone else's inspiration to make my own different than these AIs going out there and grabbing these? Because they don't always take a one-to-one image. They may take portions of an image, almost like sampling a track in music, and then they assemble it together from multiple different sources. What's the difference in the two of those?
Well, I think, in your example, I'm assuming you're like drawing it yourself.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. That's the thing. That's where I think the line is. With the AI generated art, you're just typing in what you want and it just appears, and it's compiled from other images. With the inspiration, you are taking inspiration from that thing that somebody else made and then making your own interpretation of it. Even if it's not very good, you still put in the time and the work to make it something original, even if it's inspired by something else. Like you said with sampling music, you can take a sample from another song that somebody else made, but then you incorporate that section of it and you make a whole new thing out of it. It's its own thing, even if it's borrowing from something else. And I think that's kind of where the line is drawn.
That's a good point. The other thing with Lensa is Lensa has one of the big functions Lensa adds is what they call their magic correction. So you take a picture of someone, you run it through the Lensa filter, and you have the filters with Snapchat and stuff like that that can make the googly eyes and all that crazy stuff that you can do. Is the AI that's doing that different, or do you take exception to that from a creative standpoint when it's taking your art and enhancing it because maybe you don't have the technical capabilities to do that?
I mean, that's a good question. It's similar to photoshopping an image, right, or using a filter on Instagram, or it's not authentically the thing, but it's, I don't know. As long as you still made it from the beginning, I think it's a little bit better than just straight up stealing the art. But I still think it's messing with the authenticity of it, right? And it gets into our perception of what is made by humans and what is made by AI, and what does that mean for art if we can't tell the difference. And I think that's sort of the road we're going down at this point. When it gets into the enhancement, it's not as bad. It's still not great.
Well, and I'll counter that and say if you can't tell the difference between whether it was man-made or machine-made, isn't that really the ultimate goal of AI at that point, is to make it indistinguishable from human hands?
Well, that's the scary part, right? Because if you can't tell the difference, but it still stole a bunch of other people's art, then it is actively devaluing all the art that it just stole from, even if you can't tell the difference. Even if you don't know that it took from, 10 other artists to make this, it still happened, right? And it's still, even if it's indistinguishable, the consequences of it are still real.
So the dilemma that you're referring to here is more the sourcing of where it gets its material from, rather than the generation of that material.
Right, because it's not magic, right? Like the AI is not making, it's not like physically drawing it, but it's not necessarily entirely originally from the mind of the AI. It's taking from other people to make it, and that's kind of where the issue is.
So it's just creative copying.
Yeah.
So all right, let me ask you this. If you were an artist and you had a vast portfolio of your own artwork and you use that solely to power your AI, and you decided that you're going to recreate your art in the AI style, is that legitimate?
Yeah, as long as it's only taken from your stuff. Like if that's things that you made that are, I'm not going to get into the legal aspect of it. I'm not a lawyer, but if you can guarantee that it's only pulling from your art and you are totally signing off on it, then yeah, that's fine. It gets into it when it's taking other people's art without their consent or knowledge.
So, all right, being a Star Wars fan and a Eagles fan, let me throw a couple examples of non-AI out there where both of those entities have taken what they've modified those and regurgitated it back out to the public strictly for money purposes. There wasn't anything to enhance the art. There wasn't anything to make it better or different or really anything. It was literally, I just want more money, so I'm going to re-release it. Do you have a moral issue with that? With people basically exploiting their own material for money there, trying to, I'm going to say, con people out of buying it again, because I'm one of those idiots who does it.
I was going to say, yeah. Not really, no. I mean, morally, yeah, it's not ideal, right? Like, you shouldn't be scamming people, but these things have value, and there's a reason that, they're getting the money that they are. They wouldn't be re-releasing if they weren't making money. But it's not like fundamentally impacting how we view art, right? It's just someone making a quick buck because they're re-releasing their greatest hits for the 1,000th time. It's not like, it would be like if the Eagles released a record that was music that was all samples and they didn't credit anybody. Like, that is what we're talking about here. But everybody loved it and acted like it was their original music.
So are we really to the point where Canva and ChatGPT and Lensa are making us fundamentally reconsider art at this point?
I think we're getting there. And I think the Lensa specifically, at least in my sphere, really took a lot of people by storm of like, this is awesome. Look how cool I look. I'm a cowboy. I'm a robot. But then it came out of how it really works, and everyone was like, oh, so it's not magic. It's not a computer making, it's not a computer coming up with this art itself. It's a computer interpreting other forms of art, stealing and chopping it up, and then mashing it into one new thing. And that was kind of where the issue came in. So I think we're getting there. We're getting there, right? And I have a soapbox I wrote on here, but looking at things like the Indiana Jones 5 trailer, where it's a wholly digital younger Harrison Ford, and you really can't tell the difference. Like, we're now there where in movies these CGI creations are getting close enough where you can't really tell the difference. We're past the days of Rogue One where it's zombie Tarkin and all that.
That was terrible.
But we're getting to the point where the CGI creations or de-aging in movies is becoming so realistic that it's becoming legitimately hard to tell the difference. And it's, between that and the AI art generation, it's like, where is there room for people at this point, for the human touch of it all? And that's what really, interests me and kind of scares me.
So, for years now, before AI existed, before computer generated graphics in movies and TV existed, people have been using makeup to make you look older or make you look younger. That never caused us to question the purpose or the place of art in the world. Why would de-aging someone digitally cause that kind of conflict in the art world now?
Well, because for makeup, like, you have to apply that, right? It's a physical thing you have to do. With this, it's less about the de-aging and more about the, like, making someone young again so you can make more movies with them. Like, Harrison Ford is like 80 years old. He can't be Indiana Jones like he was in the 80s. But if we can de-age him and, like, make him look young again, even though he's an old man in real life, we can keep making these movies and keep pumping them out. That's where I think the issue is. When you're doing old age makeup or trying to make someone look young with makeup, it's a little bit different because you still know underneath that makeup is still the person, right? Whereas with this, it's not. It's a robot.
So, okay, I will counter that with Chris Pine in Star Trek. So they didn't use makeup, they didn't use digitally aging. They just changed the actor and they relaunched the entire franchise. So it happens. There's different methods of this happening in doing what they did, because they did the same thing with Luke Skywalker.
Yep.
Where they didn't even bring Mark Hamill in to play the role or even to do the voice, because in Boba Fett, whatever, Book of Boba or
the
Mando
Mandalorian
2.5 or in that episode where he comes in, his voice is even digitally redone by an AI voice manipulating.
And now Darth Vader, James Earl Jones, is no longer the voice. It's all signed over to AI.
So he signed it over, and they can generate James Earl Jones' voice through AI. I'm struggling to understand where the issue is with that.
I think when it comes to, we'll use James Earl Jones as the example. When you get into like a vocal performance, when you get into the human element of it, there are things that he might do when he does a read for the fifth take that he does something different, and it's way better, right? And it was a fluke, but hey, he read it this way, and that's the line we're going to use. When you get it with AI, I don't think they're going to be able to do, like, there's that human element where you can get that random spark of creativity or performance that elevates a role more than it would just be if it was a human doing it. I think it's really that loss of the human element that I think is the dangerous part.
Well, and I think the ultimate goal of AI is to not have the human element injected into it, but have its own unique element injected into it. So I think you still have the potential for that. It didn't just have James Earl Jones record every word in the English dictionary and it just assembles them together like a really bad AI.
They should do that. That'd be pretty funny.
It basically recorded his inflections and his ability to say certain syllables. It was a much more sophisticated thing than just recording words. And then the AI assembles those sounds, but it doesn't do it the same way every time.
But, like, isn't that weird? Like, James Earl Jones is still alive, right? And unfortunately, he's going to die one day. But they're still going to use that after he's dead to make Star Wars movies with Darth Vader. Isn't that weird? It's like putting him in the ghost in the machine.
You know what? They embalmed Lennon's body and they stuck it on display in the public square for decades.
Yeah, but they didn't Weekend at Bernie's him like a puppet in a movie after he was dead. Like, I don't know. It's something about like when it comes to real life people being like turned into AI generated things, whether it be the Harrison Ford in Indiana Jones 5 or James Earl Jones and now with Darth Vader. When you're taking real people that are in real life and harnessing them using AI for creative things, it doesn't sit right with me. It just seems strange. I don't know.
Well, and you know what? To play devil's advocate here, James Earl Jones wasn't just James Earl Jones who was the voice of Darth Vader. There was so much audio work that went into that voice that it wasn't just him talking into a microphone. So there was already more to it than just James Earl Jones. If they can get that out of a computer and James Earl Jones doesn't have to show up and he already got his paycheck.
Yeah, but like, sure, there are other elements, but his voice is still the core of it, right? So if he died in the world where we don't have AI, that'd be it. We wouldn't.
So I will counter that argument with every other element, every other example of Star Wars that Darth Vader shows up in and it's voiced by someone beside James Earl Jones. It's not believable.
I don't know, man. We got to figure something out then. Like, at a certain point, you got to, like, the real world has to have some kind of impact. Like, we can't, like, I don't know. Was Carrie Fisher alive when they did that Rogue One thing? I think she was at the time, right? Like, that's so weird. It's so weird that these are real people that are aging, that we are just plucking, like, the best version of them and putting them in, like, CGI. And now with the voices is, like, eternalized. I don't know. It freaks me out.
Well, all right. So I'll give you a different angle on that. So you have, as an actor, especially a female actor, you have a finite lifespan that the industry will tolerate your aging to, right? So if you get to a point, let's say you're 50, okay? The number of roles that you run into when you're 50 are severely limited. If someone could extend their acting career and their opportunity to make money in the business by allowing digital manipulation of their features, don't you think that's at least a worthwhile endeavor for it?
Yeah, I guess, but like, do we just want to completely give in and like ageism and not try to fix it? Like, or we just want to submit to like the industry-wide like issue? I don't know. It just seems like we're compromising just to not have to like tackle the real problem head on.
Well, and I agree that it's a problem that needs to be tackled. But in the meantime, you're robbing people of opportunities if you take that tool away.
Yeah, but you're robbing them of opportunities by like being ageist too. So it's like
I agree, but the problem is a role may require somebody of a certain age to be convincing.
Wouldn't you be taking away opportunities from potentially another actress that is right for the part if we're going to instead use AI or robot Carrie Fisher instead of recasting someone that might be good at it?
It's possible, but if you were doing a Star Wars film that was after Rogue One and you needed Princess Leia in there. Now granted it's a little different because she's passed away. But if you needed someone that's age appropriate who was that actor, wouldn't it be easier and more convincing to age reduce that actor so they could do that role?
No.
Well, why not? Because then you'd wind up getting like somebody who looks nothing like Han Solo showing up in a Han Solo movie, okay?
That's true. That movie had other problems. I think that was, I don't know. This is not the Solo podcast, but I don't know. For me personally, I think it should be a recasting. I don't think it should be using AI. People cling, especially when it comes to Star Wars and properties like it, people cling to that past so hard. The past, what did Kylo Ren say? Kill it if you have to. Like, I think, I don't know, we're getting like, it's like the metatextual level of this, but I think like we can't just like keep digging up these people and putting them into computers and like Indiana Jones.
But you can. That's the point.
That's the beauty of it. We can. We never have to move on.
Nobody has to die now.
No one's ever really gone. I don't know, man. I guess we'll see when Indiana Jones 5 comes out and they just make a whole movie with CGI Harrison Ford and call it a day.
Okay. So
hey, man, support your local artist, all right, before the robots come for us all.
So that's really what you're getting at here. The risk that you're seeing here is that it could severely negatively impact actual artists with what.
Yeah, it's like the old auto factories, right? Once they figured out how to automate all that stuff, all those people got fired. If we can automate writing a script for a movie, the people that are in the movie, their voices, the effects, if we can automate all that stuff, we don't even need people anymore. And at a certain point,
so that's a twisted idea of what history is. When they automated factories, people, instead of doing menial, repetitive tasks, were trained to do better tasks. What killed auto factories were unions that kept trying to get more and more money for people. Okay, so let's just put history aside for a second there and not distort it that much.
It would still be the same outcome, though. With if we found a way to automate all this stuff where people couldn't tell the difference, we wouldn't need people to do it anymore. And I think,
but instead of being a makeup artist, you become a digital effects artist.
What if they don't want to do that? What if they like makeup? They shouldn't be forced to change because of...
So then you work in stage, okay?
They go work at Walmart.
They're not digitally enhancing anybody on the stage in a play, okay?
Not yet. We have holograms.
You're killing me.
I'm just saying, it's something to think about. There's a real it's really important that we keep the human element in these things because that's where we get sparks of creativity that you couldn't get from a robot. There's things that they don't understand. There's ways to perform, ways to say things, ways to create that AI will never know.
Until we get to the self-aware AI, and then you got to worry about other things.
Yeah, then they're coming here and they're going to get me first. They're going to turn me into AI sausage.
You picked over most of your soapbox here. Was there anything else that you wanted to sum up there?
No, that's pretty much it. Watch out. Just be weary. Anything AI, I think you should be weary. Make sure you're making sure where this stuff is coming from. Don't just look at it like it's like science magic. It's not. All these things have to come from somewhere, real tangible things.
I agree. And to be honest with you, the point of support your local artist, I absolutely agree with. That's why one of the things that I really enjoy when we go to these comic book shows and these pop culture shows is interacting with some of these artists, looking at what they're doing, watching what they're doing live, communicating with them, talking to them, what inspires them. I find that to be one of the most rewarding things of going to these shows and actually seeing the brilliance that's out there in a lot of the young artists today.
Absolutely. I don't really have any artistic talent, so I have a lot of admiration for people.
You have a lot of pent-up frustration.
Yeah,
on that.
Why couldn't it be me? I want to use a robot. No, but people that can just pick up a pen and just make something brilliant. It's incredible, and I just think that we need to make sure that sticks around. Also, when you're going to these shows, make sure that whoever you're buying from isn't using Lensa to just make this art and sell it to you, because that is for sure going to happen, because people will try to swindle you. So just think about it.
All right. I think that was all we had today, unless you were...
No, that was it.
You still worked up? You get all off your chest?
Hey, man, I think we fixed it.
Okay.
As with every show, we've solved all the problems.
You know what? We didn't end with doom and gloom.
That's true. We led with it, and then we worked our way back.
There you go. A little reverse psychology there. All right, so that was it for the show today. Before we do go, I do want to once again ask that you subscribe to the podcast. Audio versions of this podcast can be found listed as Insights into Tomorrow. Audio and video versions of all the network's podcasts can be found listed as Insights into Things. We are available on Pandora, Castro, Stitcher, Amazon, anywhere you get a podcast. I would also ask you to write in, give us your feedback. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. We do stream on Twitch 5 days a week at twitch.tv/insightsintothings. If you are an Amazon Prime subscriber, you do get a free monthly Twitch Prime subscription. We'd appreciate if you threw that our way. You can find us on Instagram at Insights Into Things, or you can find links to all that and more on our website at www.insightsintothings.com. That's it. Another one in the book.
Stay safe out there, everybody.
Bye.
Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow, where we take a deeper look into how the issues of today will impact the world of tomorrow. From politics and world news to media and technology, we discuss how today's headlines are becoming tomorrow's reality.
Welcome to Insight into Tomorrow. This is episode 17, Women's Rights Are Human Rights. I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and my special guest host this week from our Insights into Entertainment podcast, Michelle Whalen. How you doing today, Michelle?
full of many, many emotions.
I can imagine. We had actually planned on doing this podcast for a little while now. We've been working on putting it together and stuff.
Right.
Understanding that there was going to be an impending decision. And today was the scheduled day that we were going to do this.
Right. Not knowing.
Not knowing that yesterday was going to be the day that the other shoe dropped.
Right.
So we're going to continue to go through the material that we did plan, and we reserved the last segment to have an open discussion on the groundbreaking, rule-shattering, country-damaging decision, I think, that came yesterday. So there's been a disturbing trend in recent years in the United States. There's been an assault on women's, an assault has been waged on basic human rights. Victims of this assault have been chosen by color of their skin and their gender and various other things. All are victims that have been targeted for generations and have fought for their equal human rights. In this episode of Insights into Tomorrow, we're going to take a deeper look at the assault specifically on women's rights. We'll take a look at the history of women's rights through the years. We'll examine the current state of women's rights, and we'll explore the threats against those rights. Before we leave, we'll take a special look at the current issue of abortion and the not-so-impending Supreme Court decision that threatens to overturn, which it did overturn, Roe versus Wade. But before we do that, I'd like to take a moment to invite our listening and viewing audiences to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Tomorrow. You can find video and audio of all the network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things, and you can pick those up anywhere you can get a podcast these days. We're pretty much everywhere. I would also invite you to write in, give us your comments, give us your feedback, tell us how we're doing. Email us at comments@insightsintothings.com, where you can find links to all of our social media on our official website at www.insightsintothings.com. Are we ready?
As ready as we'll ever be.
Let's get into it.
So, all women are entitled to human rights. These include the right to live free from violence and discrimination, to enjoy the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health, to be educated, and to own property, to vote, and to earn an equal wage. Across the globe, many women and girls still face discrimination on the basis of sex and gender. Gender inequality underpins many problems which disappropriately affect women and girls, such as domestic and sexual violence, lower pay, lack of access to education, and inadequate healthcare. For many years, women's rights movements have fought hard to address these inequalities, campaigning to change laws or taking to the streets to demand their rights are respected. And new movements have flourished in the digital age, such as the Me Too campaign, which highlights the prevalence of gender-based violence and sexual harassment.
So there has been a fairly long history of women's fight for their rights, in the United States at least, because when the country was formed, there was no explicit provisions in the Constitution for women's rights to anything.
Mm-hmm.
The Constitution protected, quote, consent of the government, consent of the governed, which at the time meant white landholding men
Mm-hmm.
only.
Right.
The Bill of Rights did not protect everyone either. Women were considered second-class citizens. They were essentially property of their husbands.
So women started to organize as early as the Seneca Falls Convention in July of 1848. It planted the seeds for the women's suffrage movement. It pushed for equal rights for all people of all races and sexes. The end result was the signing of the Declaration of Sentiments by 100 men and women, a document based on the Declaration of Independence.
So we move into the women's suffrage movement. This is really probably the foundation for the first fight for women's rights. Wyoming passed the first law granting women the right to vote in 1869 and was the first state to grant women the right to vote in all elections in 1890. But it took until 1920 for the 19th Amendment to the Constitution to allow women the right to vote across the country.
So now let's talk a little bit about abortion and contraception. So there were widespread anti-contraception laws in 1819 before they were challenged, starting with Margaret Sanger in New York. Abortion laws criminalized pregnancy apart from saving a woman's life were in place and well into the 60s before any challenges were raised. These obviously the 1973 Roe v. Wade Supreme Court ruling that being drawn into question, unfortunately, as of yesterday.
Yeah. So then we move on to women's equal employment and equal pay. The first minimum didn't come into effect until 1912. This was later superseded by the 1938 Fair Labor Standards Act, imposing regardless of gender. It wasn't until 1963 with the Equal Pay Act that any attention was given to equitable wages too probably, but wages for the same work performed by men. It took until 1974 for Congress to include gender protection in fair housing and education as part of the Civil Rights Act. Now, it's worth noting that even though these laws were on the books, they're on the books today. They're not observed. There's still discrimination today, despite the fact that we have these laws on the books.
Right, exactly. And finally, leadership in government. So the first woman to serve in Congress was Jeanette Pickering Rankin, who didn't take her seat until 1917. But it would take nearly 100 years for a woman to take on the leadership role of Speaker of the House when Nancy Pelosi assumed that role for the first time in 2007. And we didn't see our first Supreme Court justice until 1981 with Sandra Day O'Connor. And Madeleine Albright was our first Secretary of State in 1997. And obviously, our first female Vice President, Kamala Harris, in 2020.
So, the disturbing trend that I see in this history here is there's spurts of progress. There's long periods where there's no progress. Then you get a few exceptional people that just get mad as hell and they're not going to take it anymore, and they do something about it.
Yep.
And the establishment throws a couple of crumbs out there and gives a little bit of rights to people. And then there's a long period of time until it happens again. How do you think this compares to other fights, civil rights, for instance? How do you think this compares to civil rights for African Americans and minorities?
It's almost the same, really, when you think about it. Unless you are a rich white male, you're fighting every day, and maybe once in a while something comes along that you get something, and then unfortunately something else in the news is going to pop up where everybody's mindset is on something else, and that fight still hasn't been won.
Yeah.
And until something happens with that fight again, everybody kind of forgets about it, because again, our attention span, is, we have short attention span theater, of our minds. Look at, not to get on a totally different tangent, but all of the school shootings, it's been how many weeks and none of that is in the news. There, you have the gun reforms that are they're trying to pass. But again, now that you have everything going on with Roe v. Wade, that's the main focus. But yet there's other things that still need to be focused. Black Lives Matter still needs to be a focus because you had everything that went on with George Floyd and all the other African Americans who with the police issues and things like that. And none of that was solved, but because something else came along, oh, well, now our attention, but no, you have to go back and do all the other things.
It's funny you mention that. What do you think is the cause of that? Is that a media issue? Is that a society issue? Is it a politics issue where politicians don't want to deal with the issue, so they distract with something else? Or is it media just trying to get ratings that's dictating what our issues are today?
I don't know. I think it's a little bit of. I think everybody's a little bit to blame with all of that, because obviously media is one aspect, and when you kind of think back of, okay, well, why did it take so long? So Wyoming, it was the 1800s when Wyoming, but it wasn't until the 1900s that it was actually. And you have to think back then, how long did it take for news to travel? How long, same thing with Juneteenth. It was signed into law that blacks were no longer slaves, but how many years did it take for the news to actually travel? Right. There was no quick way to do it, where now we have that instant gratification. We can, as soon as news broke yesterday of the Supreme Court's decision, everybody in the world knew about it. So I think a lot of it is because we're so hungry for information right now, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? What do I need to do? And also, we're all so tired. We're all so tired of having to stand up for everybody. And there's just so much injustice. It's like, well, where do I put my energy?
Where's my next fight? Yeah.
And it's like, I have no more spoons to give. My jar is empty because I've given, so much, because there's so much that's needed, from all of us. I think that's, where it comes to, because there's obviously thousands and thousands of organizations and different things that are in need, but it's, how much can the average person give before you have nothing left to give?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely been a problem. Let's take a little break. We'll come back and we're going to talk a little bit more detail about where we are right now with these specific women's rights. We'll be right back. For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
So let's talk about the current state of women's rights. And we'll talk first about women's suffrage. At the moment, it's safe to say that fight has been won, I guess, kind of, sort of, in the general statement, yes.
If nothing else, we can say that women are equally discriminated against with everyone else when it comes to your right to vote these days.
Yes.
Okay, there's no special discrimination
Right.
against women
Okay.
on this one.
Okay. We can go with that. Abortion and contraception. Well, this had been one, but it looks like it might be a split decision with the much anticipated ruling from the majority right-wing Supreme Court that was held yesterday. And we'll have more on this later on in the show.
So we take a look at employment and pay. So legally on paper, this was a win back in 1963 with the Equal Pay Act. Do you feel like this was a win?
No.
And I think most women would be of the same opinion. In practice, there's a long fight ahead of this one. Progress continues to be made, but not nearly enough to level the playing field between men and women, equal pay, equal work. It's a mess. And the fact that people are still getting away with it is frankly disturbing, that you can get away with it.
Yep.
Leadership in government. There was a surprising amount of progress early on this, but it's been painfully slow in coming into the modern time. Since, the 80s, 2000, we've seen some progress here. Many parts of the country are progressive enough to make the progress that's needed. There are other parts, and less progressive, less evolved parts of the country, where politics is still an old boys network. But from a national standpoint, we're seeing, we have a female vice president now, which is huge. How do you think, let's talk women's suffrage, your ability to vote. Do you feel you have the ability to go out there and vote when you want, for who you want, how you want?
Absolutely. And that's something I've never felt I wasn't able to do. I've never felt that I wasn't allowed. Even in high school, senior year was when I turned 18, and I had a history teacher who was very passionate about the women's movement and made sure she had her little pamphlets in her desk drawer, and who's turning 18 this month, fill out your form so you can vote. And she said it doesn't matter if it's a presidential election, if it's a governor election, even your little local election, you will vote every time, because there are women that died doing this. It is your heritage. It is your responsibility to pass this on and make sure you vote.
How do you think how can I say this without getting hate mail? How do you think the outcome of the 2020 election
or the 2016 election, we can even go.
You could, but specifically the 2020 election, in which there was an artificial stigma built up about the legitimacy of the election and voting and voter fraud. And it drew the entire country into that. And now we're seeing certain states that support a certain party are now imposing laws that, if not discriminating against people from voting,
will make it harder,
making it much more difficult.
Absolutely. And that's...
Do you feel threatened by that?
Fortunately, I don't, because at this point we are in a very blue state, and I've never felt threatened going to our polling places. We don't have far to travel. We usually never have more than 5 minutes to wait, if we even have a wait whenever we've gone. And I know that's not the case for states right next to ours, where people will wait in line hours to cast their vote, or have to travel, an hour to get to their polling place. And I would probably feel intimidated if I had to go through all those measures, and almost jump through hoops to fulfill my civic duty.
Right.
And nobody should have to feel that way to do that.
Absolutely. Abortion and contraception. So for now, we're going to put abortion aside because we already have a discussion on the last segment. Contraception.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that you can acquire the contraception that you want and that the health care that you need as far as women's health is readily available to you? Do you think that's a threat? Do you think progress needs to be made on that front?
So, again, being a white female, a middle-class white female in a blue state, I don't feel discriminated at all against any healthcare. I know that's not the case for others of my gender in other parts of our country. That now that is something that there are rumors about being taken away. Now you see all over social media people saying, if you're on some sort of IUD, if you're on any sort of implant, get it replaced now. Anything that, has a couple of years, because we don't know what's coming down the pike. The fact that some male can make a decision what I do with my body absolutely blows my mind. And that, whether or not I'm a married woman or a single woman should have nothing to do with it either. And that if I want to have a child, it should be by choice.
Right.
I should not be forced. I am still of age where I could have a child. I am not at a point where I would want to begin that process all over again. And I need to have that body autonomy. That's my right to decide that, and nobody else should decide it. I don't make a decision for anybody if they want to be on Viagra or not, or if they want to get reconstructive surgery or some. I don't make that decision for anybody else. So nobody should be making a decision
Sure.
for what I do to myself.
And I agree 110%. As long as you don't expect the government to pay for it, then
Right.
it's your say what you do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm totally down with that.
Mm-hmm.
Employment and pay. Where do we stand with this? Do you think there's sufficient progress? Do you think you're compensated fairly for what you do? And do you think that there is a threat to that looming?
I don't know. It's one of those things because, of course, at most places of employment, one of the rules is you don't talk about how much you make. So, you don't find out how much somebody else is making. So that's a really hard, I know, or I shouldn't say I assume within the company that I work in, there are people that work in the North Jersey facility that make much more money than the people in the South Jersey facility.
And that's unusual because of geographics.
Right, absolutely. But again, it shouldn't matter where I'm physically located because I'm doing just as much work as
there's certain
somebody
factors like cost of living and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
That you have to factor in the
totally.
salary.
I totally.
But compensation-wise, on a 1-to-1 ratio, are you being fairly compensated?
I really don't know, because it's one of the things that probably bad on me is I kind of stopped paying attention, because there's always these websites you can go to and say, how much does a person that does this job make? And the thing is, what I do for a living is kind of specific to my job, so it's kind of hard to say if I went someplace else where I could kind of try and figure it out. And I think I know I'm probably underpaid. Just one, because I'm,
Is it because you're a woman, or because you're a one of a kind person doing what you do?
I don't know. It might be a combination of both. We recently at my company had somebody who left the company who was a woman. I never asked her or found out how much she made. I knew she probably made more than I did, even though I've been with the company much longer than she had been. And we recently hired somebody who I knew was a grade level or a position higher than her. And I have a feeling probably started out making more than she did.
Okay.
So that's another,
So clearly we're not where we need to be.
No.
Leadership in government. So my question to you here is, clearly we're seeing progress certainly on the federal level.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of states are making progress with
Yeah.
women in leadership positions. You personally, do you think the door is open for you if you wanted to get into, say, local politics? Do you think you'd have any obstacles with that? Do you think you'd be discriminated against because of your gender?
I don't know. I think in a lot of cases it's still a boys' club when you come to, your local, but I'm sure there are some areas of the country where it's not like that. I've never been interested in wanting to run for a government position, so it was never something that I thought about, but I could see where I wouldn't, again, where we live, where we are. I'm sure if it was something where I started volunteering or doing things, I could, eventually see something.
What's interesting is of the 4 fundamental rights that we talked about, 3 of these you attributed to some level of political influence on how it impacts you.
Mm-hmm.
That's disturbing. That women's rights are a matter of politics.
And they shouldn't be.
No, they shouldn't. And I think that is a highlight of where we are today. And it astounds me, and we're not going to pull any punches here. You're obviously a Democratic supporter.
I am? How did you know?
What astounds me is your experience, I would say, is pretty typical for most women, Democratic women or Republican women. But there are so many staunch Republican women that support a party that has, for over a century, had policies that were contrary to women's interests.
Mm-hmm.
And what is it about people like that who would support someone who wants to hold you down? Like, I almost attribute it to like a beaten wife syndrome type thing.
Yeah.
Where they just accept their place as a lesser citizen in society.
And you have to kind of think that, there are still women that are young girls, women that are raised today to, your only job in life is to raise the family, right, and support your husband. And that's it. And I'm not knocking anyone that's what they want to do in their life. If that's
what you aspire to do, knock your socks off.
Right.
But don't hold other people back.
Exactly.
In the process.
But don't tell me that I can't do more,
Absolutely.
or tell my daughter that she can't be more.
Yeah, that's my hang up about this whole thing. As much as I hate seeing how you are treated, it irks me to think that she's going to face some of these same prejudices, and it really pisses me off.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I want to do everything I can to make sure that she's got every opportunity.
And
she has.
I'm so proud of what she stands for and what she believes in. And yes, a lot of it has to do with us, but there's a lot that, you know, is her own.
Yep.
You know, and I'm so glad that we raised her and are still raising her to be so open-minded to things. And she, in so many cases, is more open-minded than we will ever be. And that gives me hope that, you know, she's also surrounded, you know, she surrounds herself with people that feel that way too.
Yeah.
And that generation will hopefully make a difference and bring about so much that more than we could ever hope for.
I'm also very fortunate that she's patient enough to help
Educate.
carry me along in that journey.
Yes.
I've learned a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned a lot from her that I never thought I would learn.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take another break, and when we come back, we're going to take a look at what some of the obstacles and threats are to these rights. We'll be right back.
Insights into Teens, a podcast series exploring the issues and challenges of today's youth. Talking to real teens about real teen problems. Explore issues from braces to puberty, social anxiety to financial responsibility. Each week, we talk about the topics concerning today's youth. We look at how the issues affect teens, how to cope with these issues, and how parents, friends, and loved ones can help teens handle these challenges. Check out our video episodes on youtube.com/insightsintothings. Catch our audio versions on podcast.insightsintoteens.com or on the web at insightsintothings.com.
So, threats and obstacles to women's rights in America. And, you know, we'll attack these rights as we've been doing in order. So the first one we're going to talk about is women's suffrage. So in the wake of the toxic 2020 elections, there's been a wholesale attack on voting rights. These attacks aren't targeted specifically at women, and are designed to make it harder for people in general to vote. Not too much in general, but there's specific segments of the population that are targeted at. So some of the obstacles. 17 states have enacted 28 new laws that restrict access to voting by targeting citizens with disabilities. You know, the fact that they're not including accessibility, common accessibility options to get into voting places that make it difficult for people with disabilities to vote.
Mm-hmm.
They're attacking absentee voting. After the 2020 election, when excuse me, when absentee voting was done, because we were in the middle of a pandemic, a pandemic that the sitting president ignored for the first 4 months and downplayed it and pretended it didn't exist and created the crisis in the first place.
Right.
They're attacking provisional ballots. They're requiring voter ID, which there's nothing. Take a drink here. I'm joking to death. This is how much I hate these rules. There's nothing in the Constitution that says voter ID is required to cast your vote. Nowhere. So I don't know where they're coming up with that one. They're targeting voter registration. They're making it harder to register. Mm-hmm. They're requiring different requirements to now register. They're instituting registration purging. So normally with registration purging, if you don't vote, in so many elections, they purge you from the voter registration roll. Well, that number of elections is usually like 4, 5, something like that, presidential elections. Now they're saying if you don't vote in the last one, you're not registered anymore.
Oh, see,
You need to register again to vote. They're restricting student voting, making it difficult for students, because before they would make it accessible to students to vote during student hours and stuff like that at colleges. They're restricting that. And they're limiting polling places to make it harder to vote. So people who are, again, disabled, infirmed, aged, people that don't drive, they're making them travel hours to get to a voting place to cast a vote, knowing that they won't vote because they're the people that they don't want voting because they're going to vote for the opposition.
Right.
So that's some of what we're looking at here. Not specifically against women, but affecting everybody.
Right. And you figure it's the lower income, more likely the people of color.
Yep.
That's the areas that they're really targeting.
Absolutely. So what's your next one?
Abortion. Somehow, after nearly 50 years, this is still a matter of debate. Instead of being an ideological discussion, anything to do with abortions has turned into a political discussion, which generally means that all logic is out the window with it. There is a real threat to women's reproductive rights with the recent leaked draft of the opinion by the Supreme Court that now wasn't just a leak, because now it has come to fruition that they have now overturned Roe v. Wade.
More on that later.
Later on.
Deep cleansing breaths.
Deep cleansing breaths. Okay. Let's go back to employment and pay. So on average, women earn 82 cents for every dollar that a man earns. And in comparing salaries over 350 jobs, women actually earn less in nearly all jobs. Women earn less than their same race and ethnicity, their counterparts at entry-level positions, of education attained as well. So the pandemic is estimated to have set the women's labor force back more than 30 years.
So there's that progress that we're losing.
That astonishes me that during the pandemic that even, happened. Finally, leadership in government. Again, we now finally have a woman vice president. How many years did that take? And then you even look back, how far was when the first vice president, female vice president, was in the 80s, late 80s, and then
Geraldine Ferraro.
Geraldine Ferraro.
Nomination.
Never elected. And then you even had Sarah Palin, the second, never elected.
Right.
So it took 3 women, but how many years, obviously, to get to that position? Another interesting thing, for the first time in our history as a government, there will be 2 female signatures posted on currency in our country, because we will have the treasurer
Secretary of the Treasurer,
and what's the other signature that's on the bill? I can't think of what it is, but that was something that came out in the news because of a newly appointed position. Top 2 women in money.
Right. See, and I'll tell you, while that's nice that we've gotten to that point, what annoys me is every time the press takes this is the first time a woman did this, and this is the first time a woman.
Right.
It annoys me that we're saying that.
Right. It's annoying that we have to say anything like that. And when you look at, obviously there are other countries in the world that will never have women in government. But then there are other countries that have had women in leadership and had women in politics so much longer, and they kind of look at us and go, how backwards are you?
And these women were incredibly strong, competent women who overshadowed their previous male counterparts by a long shot,
right,
in most cases.
So it just baffles me, with as progressive as we say we are as a country, we're so backwards than so much more.
Well, and the thing that annoys me when we say it's the first woman to do this, that fact doesn't annoy me. What annoys me is that attention that we draw to it being the first woman to do that is the same attention that the detractors use.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, you have a first woman in the Treasury, and look at what the economy's like, as if it's their fault,
right?
And they use that fact that they're a woman as justification for how things are and the state of, and it annoys me that they do that.
Right, and the other thing too is how many women had to do so many other things to get that person, to lift that woman up.
Absolutely.
To do that. That's the thing.
Standing on the shoulders of giants.
Absolutely.
And women like Kamala Harris was extremely complimentary and appreciative of all the women that came before her that gave her the opportunity that she has today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a lot of obstacles out there that we need to
we've come far, but we haven't come far enough.
Right. And it's almost like the old boys network, their attitude's almost like, all right, well, we threw you a bone, now shut up and go away for a while, okay? You're fine. Like, they're terrified of having an equal playing field, and they think trickling little bits out here and there will keep the masses occupied and quiet them down when they get a little riled up, which is unfortunate. That's why you know, the one thing that I think might come out of this Supreme Court ruling is that a lot of rich white guys might not have a career in politics moving forward anymore. Let's
hope and pray.
We'll talk about
prayers
that.
And thoughts.
We're going to take our last break, and we'll talk about that when we come back.
Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into entertainment and media. Our husband and wife team of pop culture fanatics are exploring all things from music and movies to television and fandom. We'll look at the interesting and obscure entertainment news of the week. We'll talk about theme park and pop culture news. We'll give you the latest and greatest on pop culture conventions. We'll give you a deep dive into Disney, Star Wars, and much more. Check out our video episodes at youtube.com/insightsintothings. Our audio episodes at podcast.insightsintoentertainment.com, or check us out on the web at insightsintothings.com.
So, women's rights are human rights.
Damn Skippy.
And as of yesterday, I think we've seen a significant encroachment upon women's rights.
You think?
So, this is our open discussion on Roe versus Wade and abortion in general. You have the floor, dear.
I don't even know where to
rip into it. How about we start with just the hypocrisy of the Supreme Court's decision? Because the day before, they had a very contradictory decision.
Absolutely. They said that you could carry a gun that it's okay to carry around a gun now. You don't need to conceal it anymore.
Right. So New York had some very common sense gun safety laws
For over 100 years.
designed to save lives.
Right.
Which the Supreme Court decided that was a constitutional violation.
Right.
Where if you read the Constitution and the Second Amendment, nowhere in there does it say anything about carrying concealed weapons by citizens.
Right.
It speaks entirely about pertaining to a well-regulated militia.
Right.
Which for some reason everyone seems to want to ignore that. So
Right.
So
because it's all up for interpretation. Yep. That's what it is.
So the Supreme Court decides that we're going to do away with common sense gun law because it's against people's constitutional rights.
Mm-hmm.
But now you can't get an abortion.
Nope.
So we're preserving life on one side with overturning Roe versus Wade, but we really don't give a damn about it because you can carry guns and shoot anybody you want.
Right. So one of the memes, our government is bold enough to force you to have a kid, but is too weak to ensure that they make it to recess alive.
Yeah.
If that is not...
That's profound.
With between the past 2 days of the Supreme Court, that how...
Yeah. It highlights the ludicrous level of hypocrisy coming out of today's Supreme Court.
Right. The fact that church and state is supposed to be separate, but yet the church has more say over my body, and I'm not a member of a church.
Right.
My religion, I am Jewish, if you didn't know. My religion states abortion is okay. Because my life is more important than what is in my body, what is in my womb.
Yeah.
And until what is growing in my womb can live and take 3 breaths on its own, it doesn't have a choice over me.
Well, you could also interpret the two rulings from the Supreme Court of you can have an abortion as long as you don't mind getting shot in the process.
Right. Right. And unfortunately, there has been violence that has happened, clinics that aren't even performing abortions, because that's the other thing, is that everybody goes after they're doing all these abortions and that's not even their main purpose. That they are giving health care to women up is risking their life from these crazy psychopaths who are trying to save a child, but yet are taking their gun to go kill people.
Well, and to play devil's advocate for a minute there, you have people who are pro-abortion who are also attacking anti-abortion clinics as well. So you've got violence on both sides. You've got crimes being committed on both sides. But if nothing else, that should simply highlight the level of passion involved here, that the decision that the Supreme Court made to overturn a previous Supreme Court decision, which, honestly, that's where I have my biggest problem, is the Supreme Court has basically made itself useless.
Right.
They decided that no matter what we decide, it doesn't matter because the guys 5 years from now can overturn it.
Right, and that's where now, okay, so everybody's, kind of, you have the people that are like, oh, well, it's still at the state level and da-da-da-da-da, and now you can still travel to get to states even though they were passing laws saying that you couldn't, and that there were certain laws where, if the doctor performed one, they were going to be jailed, and the woman who received it was going to be jailed, and all this other. But this isn't where it's going to stop.
Right.
That's the thing that most people aren't looking at, is now that you've taken this away, now all these other rights of gay and lesbian couples. You're seeing that there are people out there that are, get a hold of a lawyer, make sure everything is written and that you have legal documentation. If you have children, make sure there is legal documentation. Make sure you have copies of your birth certificates and everything, that both parents are listed. If you got married in a state that is in danger of overturning your marriage decision, I have various clergy friends that are now offering free to remarry you in a state that is protecting you. And the contraception, that's another thing that now, oh, thank God for Clarence Thomas, for everything. But you know what law he's not going to overturn is Loving, because that affects him, because he's married to a lovely white woman but all the recent things he's picking in, oh, well, I can't do that one, but I can do this one.
And this is the problem that I have, is that our current Supreme Court has turned into an activist court.
Mm-hmm.
And their job is to rule on the constitutionality
Mm-hmm.
of laws and situations.
Right.
It's not to make new laws. It's not to overturn laws. The Supreme Court should never be able to overturn a Supreme Court decision.
Right.
Because the Supreme Court is the Supreme Court.
Right.
It's the law of the land.
Right.
If they can overturn their own decisions,
Mm-hmm.
where do you go from there?
Right, exactly. And that's the thing, is now what else is on the books that you can overturn?
Right. The only way a Supreme Court decision should be overturned is with a constitutional amendment.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only thing that should overturn.
Right.
So a couple of things that come out of this. One, you're going to see an assault on other freedoms that the
Mm-hmm.
right-wing nut jobs in the Supreme Court don't agree with. That's
Yep.
the number one concern. Number two, you're going to push decisions like this down to the state.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to have 50 different laws in 50 different states covering all these different things.
We're basically becoming 50 different countries at
Yep.
this point.
Yep. The other problem that I have is now, because you're going to see the Supreme Court overturning Supreme Court precedent, the only way to defend against that is a constitutional amendment.
Mm-hmm.
And to think of our politics today and who's, how that razor sharp edge that we're on right now
Mm-hmm.
between Republican and Democrat, to think that these idiots would contemplate doing amendments to the Constitution terrifies me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, we thought we were ripping the Constitution apart with the 2020 election. These people are just itching to rewrite it in their favor.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what scares me more than anything else. Yes, the whole abortion thing is probably never should have gotten to the Supreme Court, because really it's not, and at least it shouldn't have gotten there in the form that it did, because abortion is not a constitutionally protected right. Your health is, your personal well-being is, and that's how it should have been presented
Mm-hmm.
to the Supreme Court, and then you couldn't overturn it at that point.
Right, right.
But things that go to the Supreme Court now don't matter.
Right.
Because after a couple of years and you get a couple of justices retire, whoever happens to be president at the time, they're going to switch it their way.
Mm-hmm.
There's a real threat that Joe Biden might pack the Supreme Court now because of the situation that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So then, okay, so 5 years down the line, when we have a new president out there, what's going to happen there? Are we
Right.
going to wind up with 50 Supreme Court justices? Because every time a new president comes in, they want to make sure that the court's tilted in their favor.
Mm-hmm.
This decision breaks the country.
Mm-hmm. In so many ways.
Yeah. Do you feel threatened by this?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And fortunately, again, I'm an older woman. Ugh, as much as that hurts me. Who I know, if, again, something were to happen, I have the means, I have the ability to get the help that I would need. no matter what, because again, we live in a state where it is still legal and will probably always remain legal. I worry about women, girls, trans men, even, who live in areas where they don't have it accessible and can't get the help that they need.
Yeah.
That's what makes me angry. And I want to go fight.
What do you think needs to happen to set this right? What does the government, the president, the Supreme Court, citizens, what do we have to do to fix this and have it stay fixed? Because we thought it was fixed.
Right. And that's the thing, is there are certain states where it is fixed. No matter what the law of the land is, it's, it was voted in. And that's, I think, what is so frustrating, is that why does it even need to be that way? Why do people have to vote on it? If I want to go and buy a pack of cigarettes, I can go and buy a pack of cigarettes. What does it matter if I want to, do that? And I've never been a smoker, and I would never want to smoke, but yet you can go and that's what's just so.
Your point there being, it's your body, you can do what you want to do.
Right. And granted, I got into a discussion, a little bit of a debate with a friend of mine that from high school, where, again, my body, my choice, and she's anti-vax and, but very liberal in certain respects and conservative in, she's kind of like all over the board. Like, she would never get a vaccine because she just doesn't trust the government. And when I, and I said, but, I don't have to do certain things, or I can do certain things. And, she said, well, you wore a mask when you were told to. And I was like, I wore a mask because I was protecting myself. And guess what? I still wear a mask now, even though the majority of the people don't. And yes, I am fully vaccinated and boosted and whatever, but I'm still wearing a mask because I don't want to get sick.
Yeah.
But if, I think back to when I was in college, and if I had gotten pregnant in college, I wasn't ready to be a mother then, so, and then there are women that, have other medical issues. My best friend had to have a late-term abortion because if she had carried her baby to term, she could have died.
Right.
So, it shouldn't be something that's a law that you're forced to do or not to do. It's your body, it's your choice.
And the hypocrisy, again, that we always seem to go back to the hypocrisy of this. So the Supreme Court ruled in a case where members of the armed forces sued the Army or whatever branch of the government, branch of the military they were in, when they were told that they had to get vaccinated.
Mm-hmm.
And the Supreme Court ruled they didn't have to. They had a right to choose.
Right.
If you have a right to choose whether or not you take a vaccine, how do you not have a right to choose whether or not you carry a child to term?
Right.
Isn't carrying that child to full term far more impactful than getting a vaccine?
Right.
Where you would think you would have that option?
And the hypocrisy of it, too, is if men had the ability to carry, now granted, trans men can, I don't want to exclude them, but if these white cis men were at risk of their body harming them, because think about it, and you've mentioned it numerous times, especially watching me go through childbirth and what happened I ended up having to have an emergency C-section because our daughter was in distress, and you got to see firsthand what my body went through. You've said time and time again, there's no way in hell you would have been able to do that.
Right.
And I bet you if you polled, the majority of men, would you be willing to go through childbirth? Would you be willing to do all these things? No. No, they wouldn't. But yet, you'll put your partner or your wife or your mistress, you'll engage in an act and not have any thought process behind that.
Yeah. The other interesting hypocrisy here is they're forcing women to carry children to full term. Are they forcing the sperm donor to be a father, to be there, to have any level of responsibility?
And that's the thing, is that at the moment of conception, that's when you should be paying child support.
Right. Absolutely.
And get to walk away now.
Yep.
That is now, there were a couple of memes like, Happy Father's Day, you're now going to be a dad because of that. You decided, you didn't want to put a condom on.
Right. We're up against the clock here, but I did want to raise one more point. We had talked about it off the air, and I think it's worthwhile mentioning because I think it's a great example. Tell us about the adoption one.
Yeah, let me bring that one up. So this was an interesting,
because I thought this was very poignant.
Yes, this was recently posted and is something for the Supreme Court to consider. Can a 13-year-old girl adopt a baby if she wants to? No, obviously not. Are you nuts? What about a 15-year-old girl? Can she adopt a baby if she feels like it? Nope, absolutely not. All right, how about an 18-year-old girl? Surely she could adopt a baby, right? No, still can't. Well, what if she was 20, no longer a teenager? A 20-year-old can definitely adopt a baby if she feels like it, right? Actually, no. Well, weird. Why not? There are over 400,000 children in foster care, so why can't she adopt at least one of them? She just can't. And you know why? Because you have to qualify to adopt a child. There are rigorous background checks, home visits, proof of financial and mental stability, etc. It's a whole thing, right? But if she is 14 and gets impregnated by an abusive ex-boyfriend who shoved her out of his moving car and left her for dead, she must now carry to term, give birth, just figure it out somehow? Yes, that is correct. But she's only 14. She will figure it out. But she should also have been more careful and made better choices. So, to punish her for her poor choices, we force her into motherhood, which we've established she's totally unqualified for. And now we are suddenly comfortable with a young, traumatized girl caring for a vulnerable, little screaming human being that is wholly reliant on her for survival? Yes, absolutely. Such an unexpected blessing.
And I think that right there sums up the problem. We have standards for what it means to be a qualified parent.
Yep.
We enforce them in one instance in adoption. We ignore them completely in every other instance.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else to be said on the matter at this point?
Vote.
Yep.
Stay angry. Let your voice be heard.
That is the only silver lining I see here, is that they're forcing this onto the states, which means your elected leaders will now not be able to hide behind a Supreme Court decision.
Mhm.
They're going to have to go on record on the voting roll call on whether or not they support this. And unlike the Supreme Court justices, the 3 Supreme Court justices that Trump appointed, who all said on the record that they would not overturn Roe versus Wade, and they did,
Right.
you can hold these politicians accountable by voting them out of office.
Absolutely. The other thing, too, is I've seen people posting, I currently live in a red state. I need to move. I had another friend whose children are getting ready to go to college and have now changed which schools they're considering now.
If only we could impeach Supreme Court justices for perjuring themselves during their confirmation hearings.
And that's something, that's making the rounds. So
that's all we had today. Did you have anything else before we go?
resist.
Resist. There you go. Before we do go, I did want to once again invite our listening and viewing audience to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Tomorrow. Video and audio of all the network's podcasts can be found listed as Insights into Things. We're available on Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, anywhere you can get a podcast. We would also ask you to write in, give us your feedback, tell us how we're doing, give us your topics you'd like us to discuss. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com.
You can find us on Twitter at twitter.com/insights_things.
We do stream 5 days a week on Twitch at twitch.tv/insightsintothings.
You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/insightsintothingspodcast.
You can find high resolutions of all of our video on YouTube at youtube.com/insightsintothings.
You can find us on Instagram at instagram.com/insightsintothings.
Where you can find links to all this and more on our official website at www.insightsintothings.com. That's it. Another one in the books.
Have a good week, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow, where we take a deeper look into how the issues of today will impact the world of tomorrow. From politics and world news to media and technology, we discuss how today's headlines are becoming tomorrow's reality.
Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow, episode 21. Is the Supreme Court broken? I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and my co-host, Sam Whalen.
Hey everybody, how's it going?
How you doing today, Sam?
Doing okay, excited. We're getting back into the flow. This is like our third episode in a couple months?
Something like that, yeah.
Back on a roll.
Yeah, well, at least now when we do plugs on our other shows, I don't have Madison saying, well, you're not quite monthly podcast. That you guys don't do monthly anymore. So at least now we're getting back into the flow of things. So today we're going to be talking about whether or not the Supreme Court is broken, with a series of landmark rulings from the Supreme Court, some of which were precedent-breaking, almost all in support of the current conservative agenda. Is the Supreme Court broken? are 9 unelected justices, 3 of which were handpicked by probably the most controversial president in American history, dictating the direction of a government that is supposed to be a republic of the people. Well, that's what we're going to be discussing today on this episode of Insights into Tomorrow. But before we do that, I would like to take a moment to invite our listening and viewing audience to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Tomorrow. You can find video versions and audio versions of all the network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things. And we're available on Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spotify, any place you can get a podcast these days.
Rest in peace, Stitcher. They're shutting down.
Are they? I hadn't heard that. Oh, I got to take those off the list then.
Yeah.
Wow, they've been around a long time, too.
I used to use Stitcher, and then they changed their interface, and it was terrible, and then I stopped using Stitcher, and I think a lot of other people did too.
Apparently a lot of other people did, too. You can also email us or reach out to us. Our email is comments@insightsintothings.com. We are on Twitter at insights_things, or you can get links to all those and more on our official website at www.insightsintothings.com. Are we ready?
Let's get into it.
Here we go. So our first topic comes from New York Times, and they tell us that the recent Supreme Court term concluded with a series of 6-3 decisions divided along partisan lines, with the court's 6 Republican appointees in the majority. Those rulings on affirmative action, student loans, and gay rights were reminiscent of the transformative conservative decisions issued last June on abortion, guns, religion, and climate change. Is the Supreme Court in crisis? And if so, how could it be fixed? Complaints by the Supreme Court have cropped up throughout American history, but they've taken on renewed urgency since President Biden's inauguration. In the past, some of these criticisms have come from the left, such as when Franklin Roosevelt threatened to, quote, pack the courts to protect New Deal legislation. Others emerged from the right, like anger aimed at the, quote, activist bench that decided Roe v. Wade in 1973. But more recently, Democrats, stung by the Republican Senate majority's refusal to hold hearings on President Barack Obama's nominee Merrick Garland in 2016 and its replacement of Ruth Bader Ginsburg with Amy Coney Barrett just weeks before the 2020 presidential election, have reinvigorated calls for reform.
So is there a problem? Is there a problem with the nation's highest court? The appointment process has become more politicized than ever, like most things in this country, leading to dogmatic justices and a court whose legitimacy among the public could be in danger. In the past, it had not been the case that the public could look at these 9 people and see them projecting the ideological preferences of the political party that brought them to the bench. After Brown versus Board of Education, a case could be made that something changed in the American psyche. The idea that the court had, quote, final interpretive authority had been solidified in the public mind, and the, quote, perceived power of the Supreme Court in popular political culture vastly expanded. This shifted the debate to how to interpret the Constitution, which created an even bigger incentive for presidents to vet and select judicial candidates who would faithfully execute their agenda. So because of that, leaders began to choose nominees who were young enough to influence decision-making for decades after that president had left office. So you're seeing, they'll appoint a judge, but even after they've left the office, we're still seeing the ramifications of that appointment years after the fact. One effect we have today are judicial amendments to the Constitution, which with no ready means to overturn them. Of course, short of Congress actually cooperating to add new amendments to the Constitution that the justices would have to consider, of course. So, we're looking at what all this means, right? These judges have a ton of power, and how is that affecting a lot of these decisions?
Yeah, and without going into a civics lesson here, the purpose of an executive, a judicial, and a legislative branch was to have separation of power.
Mm-hmm.
And at no point in time when that form of government was created was the intent to have Congress actually writing laws. So the problem that Congress can literally interpret what the Constitution says. They can tell you now what those laws are. So the Supreme Court can come in and rule against how it's actually written. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that you hear a lot about in the news is your Second Amendment right to bear arms. Well, one of the things that a lot of people who talk about this subject fail to mention is that in the Constitution, it says the right to bear arms is tied directly to militia. Mm-hmm. And the Supreme Court simply interpreted that as to not be the case anymore. And they decided that everyone should be able to bear arms, whether you're with a militia. Now, if you look at the history of militias, local militias, which everyone remembers, the Minutemen and all that stuff that were the militia, they were evolved through legislative processes into what is today the modern National Guard. So when we say militia today, that equivalent is National Guard. Now, you could make a case that says only the National Guard, who are citizen soldiers, should have the right to bear arms, and it would make sense. But the court didn't interpret it that way, and the court says everyone should have the ability to bear arms.
Right.
We're seeing this now, and one of the things that we're seeing now is that the decisions that are being made along partisan lines. And the entire concept of the Supreme Court is that they're supposed to be impartial. They're appointed. They're not elected. Mm-hmm. And they could be appointed by either party, of which parties themselves technically are unconstitutional, since there's no concept of political parties in the Constitution that you can make an argument for right there. But the problem that we're running into now is you've got people that are on the court that are not necessarily making impartial decisions from what people are saying. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been kind of tough to watch, honestly. Especially when you think about how you would like things to work we're not necessarily a straight up democracy. We're a republic, or a democratic republic, right?
Federal republic.
Yeah. But in a certain extent, you would want the will of the people to be reflected by the people that are leading us. And I don't really think that's the case necessarily, especially when we are going to look at a lot of these rulings today. A lot of people don't agree with these rulings, but there really is nothing we can do about it because they're the Supreme Court and they hold all the power when it comes to these things. And especially when you've got the conservative majority, obviously a conservative agenda is going to be more pushed, than the other side of things. And there's just no getting around that.
Well, and the one point the article makes is that the only thing that Congress can do to take back the power that the people elected into them would be to come up with amendments to the Constitution. So the Supreme Court would then have to consider these amendments. Of course, they could rule any way they wanted on those amendments. But the problem you run into now is that the political environment is so contested, there's no way you're going to get both Republicans and Democrats to agree enough to get any kind of amendment passed. And to be honest with you, with the politicians we have today, I think the last thing this country needs is people starting to write amendments to the Constitution.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope.
So how do we get that power back into the hands of the people?
Oh, you're asking me? I have no idea. I mean, I legitimately have no idea because, like we talked about, these folks aren't elected; they're appointed. So I guess it would be voting for the political candidates that you think would appoint the judges you want. But even then, there's no guarantee that's going to happen. I don't know if there's a legal way to to contest it. I don't think there is. Right? It's the Supreme Court. I mean, you always go to that higher power. The highest power for law is the Supreme Court, right? So maybe at the state level.
Theoretically, the only thing that really could be done would be what the Republicans were concerned the Biden administration was going to do, and that is pack the courts. Mm. So there's nothing constitutionally that says the court is limited to 9 justices. We've had more in the past. So the president could call for the expansion of the Supreme Court, add, say, 3 additional people to the Supreme Court, appoint 3 Democrats, so you'd have
6 and 6.
6 and 6 at that point in time, and try to bring some balance back to it. That's feasible, and that's something that's well within his power. But the punishment of the attacks that he would get for packing the court like that from the Republicans, he'll be impeached within a week once he even mentions that.
But wouldn't you want it to be balanced? Is that not like? Wouldn't you want enough?
I would, as a citizen, I would.
But I guess if you want,
as a Republican,
Right.
you don't when you have the power.
yeah,
Because if you look at history, whenever government power has been balanced, where the executive is one party and the legislature is another party,
nothing gets done.
nothing gets done.
Yeah.
And really, that's really the best scenario that we have at this point in time is gridlock. Because if neither side can get anything done, they can't screw things up any more than they already have.
Yep. Or further assert their own agenda and get more power for themselves.
That's it. And the problem that you have right now is that when you can appoint members to the Supreme Court that will carry out your agenda and not be impartial, that is packing the court, really.
Right.
And they did exactly that under Trump, where they rushed through the last appointment after Ginsburg died.
Yep.
And had she held out, and I don't mean to make light of this, but had she held out, because I think she was in a state of coma at the time, and they had just kept her on life support, they couldn't have filled that seat until after the election. And you would have had a more balanced, it still would have been imbalanced, but you would have had a more balanced court at that time. So
Yeah.
I think the problem we have is the process by which justices are appointed is now ripe with corruption, and it has become a political process. And I think that the integrity of the Supreme Court has deteriorated to the point that you've got Supreme Court justices now that are under investigation for corruption themselves, where you've got Clarence Thomas, who's under investigation for taking undeclared presents or undeclared gifts, basically bribes,
Right.
from a very prominent, very well-known Republican supporter that he was supposed to declare and didn't. And when you've got that kind of suspicion on your Supreme Court, it's really hard to take them seriously as being a Supreme Court at that point.
Yeah, because ideally, at the end of the day, we all know politicians are corrupt, right? I mean, everybody knows that. But ideally, you would want the last line of defense to be the Supreme Court, to be impartial, to be the one thing you can count on to kind of right the ship. But that is not the case anymore, and maybe it hasn't been for a while.
No, you're absolutely right, and I think that's the problem we're at. That's the situation we're in now, where they were always the sanity check. They were always the ones that came in impartially. Not always. I mean, there was partiality in there for years, but they were the element of government that would come in that were the babysitters, that would, push the two sides apart and say, all right, let's look at this. Let's look at what's legally precedent. Let's look at what's best for the country, and let's do the right thing. And you're just not getting that referee from them now.
Yep.
So I think we're going to take our first break, and when we come back, we're going to take a look at some of the more impactful decisions from the most recent term of the court. We'll be right back. For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to Insights into Tomorrow. Today we are discussing the Supreme Court and some of their recent decisions. So the first thing we're going to cover is the ruling on affirmative action. The Supreme Court effectively gutted affirmative action, ending race-conscious admissions. In a historic decision, the U.S. Supreme Court recently, like we just said, ended race-conscious admission programs in colleges and universities across the country. In a decision divided along ideological lines, the 6 conservative justices, supermajority, that's a cool word, maybe not in practice, but it's a cool word, invalidated admission programs at Harvard and the University of North Carolina. The decision reverses decades of precedent upheld over the years by narrow Supreme Court majorities that included Republican-appointed justices. It also ends the ability of colleges and universities, public and private, to do what most say they still need to do, and that's consider race as one of the many factors in deciding which of the qualified applicants is to be admitted. So that's the first thing we're covering. This is a pretty big deal, especially for those that are affected by it. And it was really that public and private thing that I really latched onto, that it's everywhere. You think of the big schools, like it mentions Harvard and North Carolina, but this is going to affect a lot more than just them.
Yeah, and there's, with all things, there's 2 sides to every story here. And really what we're looking at here is you've got one side that basically says that you can't, by bringing race in and giving preferential treatment to one race over another is discrimination. So you can't do that. When the point was because discrimination existed already.
Right.
And you were getting preferential treatment to one race over another. So they legislatively forced you to, if not change that practice, then to at least adhere to certain percentages, certain quotas that you had to have. And the problem that you run into here is that you're saying, okay, let's do it natively. Well, then in a perfect world, that works. You can do that. But we don't live in a perfect world, because when you do away with administrative discrimination,
Societal
yeah. discrimination that's going to take over in that place.
And that's kind of the thing, that when people argue that, but then people forget that racism exists, and
Right.
that's why it had to be forced in the first place, is because if we make it not equal, and it needs to be mandated to make it, well, I guess it's not equal, but you know what I mean, to give those people the opportunity that they otherwise probably would not be afforded, and now will not be afforded.
Well, and I think that was what the original point of this legislation was. It was to force you. But in trying to get to that point, you simply instituted a different form of discrimination. So you're treating the problem really is the discrimination. And until a human being can evolve to the point, you're not gonna have that happy balance. And that's kind of what the majority have argued. The 6-3 majority argued, quote, many universities have for too long concluded, wrongly, that the touchstone of an individual's identity is not challenges bested, skills built, or lessons learned, but the color of their skin. Our constitutional history does not tolerate that choice. Now, I take exception to that one to begin with there, because our Constitution declares that all men are created equal. And when it was written, they knew all men weren't created equal, because also in the Constitution, 3/5, every African American who was in the country was counted as 3/5 of a person. So the hypocrisy in the Constitution itself tells me that we don't have a constitutional history that says this is intolerant.
Yeah.
As he has done before, Justice Thomas, the second black justice appointed to the court, reiterated his long-held view that affirmative action imposes a stigma on minorities. Now, this I think he has a point with. I don't think the way he puts it here has a point. says, quote, "While I'm painfully aware of the social and economic ravages which have befallen my race and all who suffer discrimination, I hold our enduring hope that this country will live up to its principles that all men are created equal, all equal citizens, and all must be treated equally before the law." Now, I think he's smart enough to know that that's not how the world is right now.
No, that's a
The fact that he makes a statement like this is naive, and it's insulting, really,
yeah,
that he
because
would make
it
this
puts the
statement.
ball in our court of like, hey man, we got rid of it. You guys got to be better.
Right.
It's like, no, the Supreme Court exists to do that. It is your job, and more so part than like every citizen, to uphold these values and to fight for this kind of equality that you're talking about here. But you're not doing that. You're doing the opposite of that, and then
Right.
you're basically washing your hands of it and saying, well, hey, we live in a society. You know what I mean? Like,
Right. Now, to Thomas's point, I can understand the rationale that by holding African Americans to a lower standard, that you're imposing a stigma on them. And really, if it was me, I would be insulted. So really what we're talking about here is, if you have two people who are one white, one black, they both apply for school, you have to take, under normal circumstances, you would take the person who's the most qualified, and that qualification would be equally measured. But instead, what we're talking about here is somebody who may need a 3.5 grade point average if they were Caucasian to get in, an African American may only need a 3.25. And Thomas's point is, by holding them to that lower standard, you're basically telling them that they're not good enough. So there's a logic to it, but the way that he uses that logic is so distorted and so tone deaf to the spirit of this legislation, because what's happening is, in reality, you're saying, reality is saying, if the Caucasian has a 3.5 and the African American has a 3.5, we're going to let the Caucasian guy in because he's not black. And that's what reality is.
yeah.
And Thomas fails to address that with his stigma argument. So Chief Justice Roberts goes on, and for his part, pointed out the court's 2003 decision reaffirming the constitutionality of affirmative action programs, noting that Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, writing for the court at the time, had suggested that there would have to be an end at some point in the future. And Roberts declares that time is now. And I think the problem is, it hasn't. Human beings,
It's only gotten worse.
not even human beings, Americans have not gotten to the point that they're mature enough to assume, to understand that all men are created equal. With the amount of legislation that's happening today that is discriminatory, that is holding African Americans down, that's holding Asian Americans down, the hatred that is an upswelling of political force in this country today, is a clear indicator that not only are we not ready, we're not moving in the right direction, we're sliding backwards from where we need to be.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be something we say a lot on this episode. It feels like we're regressing.
Yeah.
And I think it is absurd to assume that the time is now is when we need to end affirmative action. If anything, we might need to go the other way with it to make it more affirmative, right? Because things seem to be only getting worse, and that's going to be a common theme here. We also have the opposing view, and this is from Justice Sonia Sotomayor. She said that the court subverts the constitutional guarantee of equal protection by further entrenching racial inequality in education, the very foundation of our democratic government and pluralistic society. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the court's first black female justice, also chimed in, saying, with Let Them Eat Cake obliviousness today, the majority pulls the ripcord and announces colorblindness for all by legal fiat. Sorry. When you're quoting Supreme Court justices, they're much smarter than I am. But deeming race irrelevant in law does not make it so in life, which is exactly what we just talked about. Just because you say it's that idea of like a post-racial America, right? Like we elected Obama, racism's over. It's like, no, it's not.
Right.
And that is clearly being reflected here as well.
Yeah, no, and the problem that we run into here is that what the majority are arguing here is they're arguing the point of a fiction, that in a perfect world, we shouldn't need this legislation. And they're right. In a perfect world, we shouldn't. The world we live in is far from perfect.
Yeah.
And this happened to be a stopgap measure to make things better. Nothing else has happened in this world to make that situation better. Mm-hmm. If anything, that situation's gotten worse. So by taking away some of the safeties that you've had in place to try to provide legal protections for people, you're doing your part. You're being part of the problem, not part of the solution at that point.
Yeah. Why did they do this? just to have a rule? Like, what was the motivation behind it? I don't even like.
Well, the motivation is what motivates conservatives to want to do things like this.
Yeah, I guess just further the agenda, right?
Right. They're pushing an agenda which they shouldn't be pushing an agenda. They should be looking at each and every case on a standalone basis and making educated, objective decisions. They should not be influenced by party politics, and that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, I wonder if we'd have as harsh criticism if it was the other side, right? But I also think the liberal agenda or Democratic agenda is not as aggressive as the conservative agenda, and not as
which by its definition doesn't make sense.
Right.
That your conservatives are the more aggressive.
And that you're supposed to not like big government, right?
Exactly.
And this is the opposite of that. This is the biggest government.
Well, you could argue that this is a limitation of government because it's government making impositions over the schools. And they're saying, well, government shouldn't do that anymore. The schools need to regulate themselves.
I more so meant the 6-3 majority basically being able to do whatever it wants without being like stopped.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I think
I see what you mean though.
The motivation that they have at this point in time is, we're a progressive Supreme Court now. We're going to do things right the way that we see it. We're going to make the changes that should have been made years ago, and they're going to undo what's being undone. And there's a couple of problems with that. One, you're undoing existing precedent. So by every time you undo a precedent, like they did in the last session when they overruled Roe versus Wade, every time you overrule a Supreme Court precedent, you delegitimize the Supreme Court.
Nope.
The whole point of the Supreme Court
it's final.
Is it's supreme.
Right. Right.
So when the Supreme Court can override the Supreme Court, then what the Supreme Court today, who's overriding that, says can be overridden.
Who watches the Watchmen,
Right. So they're delegitimizing the Supreme Court. So that's probably one of the biggest problems that you run into. The other problem is the things that haven't been ruled on, that really are important stuff that need to be ruled on, are being pushed to the side so that they can use this agenda that they have to rewrite the rules that have already been written. So you're hurting the country. Be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem.
And you talk about the correcting itself, so the Supreme Court overriding itself. It's like it really does. I didn't even think about that until just now. It really does have a very harmful effect because that basically could eliminate precedent in general. Because
absolutely,
if they rule on now and then in 10 years there's different judges and they just are like, no, that's not. We're just gonna get rid of that. It's like, well, then what was even the point of doing it in the first place? It's like it's all temporary until you have a majority the other way that comes in and just does everything the other way. It does really delegitimize the whole process.
And that's what we've seen with political parties as well. One political party will come in and they'll be in power for 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, whatever, they control a legislative and executive, and they'll push their agenda. And the other side will fight them tooth and nail. Then they'll switch powers and the balance changes. And then the other guys are fighting. And nothing gets done. Nothing substantial gets done. We don't get universal health care. We don't get tax reform. We don't get any of the things that the country needs because they spend all the time fighting. Now, we expect that from our politicians. We don't expect that from our Supreme Court. We deserve better from our Supreme Court because these are appointed positions. They don't have to campaign. They don't have to get elected. They're not chosen by the people. They're handpicked. They're cherry-picked by the president, and it's for life. And they need to be held. They're not even held to the same standards, the same moral and ethical standards that lower courts are held to. There's no ethical board that oversees the Supreme Court. You would think instead of being the exception to the rule, the Supreme Court should be the precedent to the
example.
rule. They should be the ones that are under the most scrutiny. Their taxes should be looked at on a regular basis. Their gifts that they receive, their rulings that everything should be looked at. Their political affiliations, the friends that they take their vacation trips with, all of that stuff should be gone over with a fine-tooth comb on a constant basis because of the position they're in and the power that they possess.
Yeah.
It's dangerous that it's not, and it's dangerous that these people can possess more power than the elected officials in this country. That's really where the problem is. And it has a broader impact. You know, this recent decision is likely to cause ripples throughout the country, and not just in higher education, but in selective primary and secondary schools. Ultimately, effects will be felt in every aspect of the nation's economic, educational, and social life. From the Rooney Rule that requires a minority applicant to be considered in all NFL coaching hiring decisions, to employment and promotion decisions, the diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in schools and workplaces, and much more. The Supreme Court literally just said discrimination is legal.
Yeah.
That's what this decision says. And that is exceedingly dangerous for this country.
And I really think it is naive too, because how are you able to exist, especially as a Supreme Court justice, where you've been dealing with law your entire life? Surely you'd be able to see that people are not treated equally, right? These things, if you let things run themselves, they will not run well, right? Like, it's not going to just fix itself. It's not going to be equal if you let people do it, because like we talked about at the top of this break, affirmative action was put in the first place because it wasn't equal. So it's like, do you think that's just going to magically fix itself, especially now when, hate crimes are on the rise and discrimination's worse than it has been in a very long time? And, but then again, maybe that's all part of the plan.
Well, and I'll be the first one to say, I watched the hearings when Clarence Thomas was up for Supreme Court nominations, and the questions that he was asked and how racially biased the people that were questioning him from the other side were, and that was Democrats questioning him at the time. It was brutal. And that was a small fraction of what he's had to put up with his whole life. Because he's a man who has set precedent his entire life with his career being African American, doing the things he did. You would think going through that and then making the statements that he said on this ruling, they were coming from two completely different people.
Yeah, like how do you even believe that when he says that?
Right.
Like,
It's astonishing what he's saying now and what he's been through in his life.
Yeah.
So
And that was point number 1.
Yeah.
We've got 2 more to do.
that was rough. We're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about something that might be a little closer to you, and that is the student loan forgiveness plan being rejected. We'll be right back.
Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into entertainment and media. Our husband and wife team of pop culture fanatics are exploring all things from music and movies to television and fandom. We'll look at the interesting and obscure entertainment news of the week. We'll talk about theme park and pop culture news. We'll give you the latest and greatest on pop culture conventions. We'll give you a deep dive into Disney, Star Wars, and much more. Check out our video episodes at youtube.com/insightsintothings. our audio episodes at podcast.insightsintoentertainment.com or check us out on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to Insights into Tomorrow. We are continuing our discussion on the Supreme Court's recent rulings. So in this segment, we're going to talk about the rejection of the student loan forgiveness plan. The Supreme Court effectively killed President Joe Biden's $400 billion plan to cancel or reduce federal student loan debts for millions of Americans. The 6-3 decision, we've heard that number a lot, with conservative justices in the majority, said the Biden administration overstepped its authority with the plan, and it left borrowers on the hook for repayments that are expected to resume in the fall. The court held that the administration needed Congress's endorsement before undertaking so costly a program. The majority rejected arguments that a bipartisan 2003 law dealing with national emergencies, known as the HEROES Act, gave Biden the power he claimed.
The president said he would work toward a new path for student debt relief using the Higher Education Act, which he called, quote, the best path that remains to provide as many borrowers as possible with debt relief. He also moved to create a, quote, on-ramp that would help ease the risk of default for students who fail to make payments when the current pause ends. Biden blamed Republican officials. Again, it's always the other guy's fault. Biden blamed Republican officials for causing the dispute that led to Friday's ruling, saying, quote, they had no problem with billions in pandemic relief loans to businesses, and those loans were forgiven. But when it came to providing relief for millions of hardworking Americans, they did everything in their power to stop it.
That's actually a pretty good quote from Biden.
Yeah.
I feel like we don't get a lot of those.
I'm sure it was written and somebody else wrote it.
Loan repayments will resume in October. Can't wait for that. Although interest will begin accruing in September. The interest is where they get you, by the way. The Education Department has announced payments have been on hold since the start of the coronavirus pandemic more than 3 years ago. Oh my God, where does the time go? The forgiveness program would have canceled $10,000 in student loan debt for those making less than $125,000 or households with less than $250,000 in income. 26 million people had applied for relief, including me, and 43 million would have been eligible, maybe me, the administration said. The cost was estimated at $400 billion over 30 years. Yeah, this is a heartbreaker. Let's really hoping this will go through. Obviously, I'm biased. I have student loan debt. And this $10,000 would have been a decent chunk of my loans that would have really helped me out. Now, I understand. I hear the argument, right? People are saying, well, you have to work to pay off your loans. But if you go watch, and I don't remember what episode it was, the episode where we talked about student debt, we talk about how the cost of college has gone up astronomically. So it's not as simple as just saying, oh, you have to work harder, right? And this usually comes from the older generation of telling people my age, well, you just have to work hard. You need to stop buying your avocado toast so you can afford to buy a house one day, when it's really not that simple. Especially when interest, like I mentioned, the interest is where they're going to get you, because as the interest compounds on itself, I've heard so many stories of people that have been paying their loans for like 30 years and they still owe more than when they started because of the interest.
Yeah, and I think, again, this is another one of those situations where the proposed solution is treating the symptoms, not the problem. I totally agree that $10,000 off your loan would be really nice. But the problem isn't how much you borrowed. The problem is how student loans are structured. And in the episode that we had talked about student loan, the fact that it's predatory, number one, where these banks are coming after students knowing what the cost of college is and the potential for getting paid back over time, the banks are willing to wait for it, especially when they know they're going to take your debt and they're going to sell it to other companies and make money that way. And then these companies that sell it then get investors to invest in it. And the last thing these investors want you to do is pay your loan off. Yeah. What they want you to do is keep paying your interest, because that's how they get their money. The problem isn't necessarily students that borrow money to go to college. Part of the problem definitely is the cost of college, which has gone up unjustifiably. The other problem is these aren't traditional loans. These are credit cards, basically. If you went out and you bought a house, say you bought a house, we'll just use round numbers. You bought a house for $100,000 and you get 10% interest, which is like credit card interest on a house, by the way. But we're just doing it to illustrate.
Economics are hard.
So at the end of 30 years, you would have paid $10,000 in interest on that house. So your house would have cost you $110,000. That's it. The amount of interest that you're going to pay on that house is calculated the day that you get your loan. And it's a fixed amount. They amortize it over the course of the loan. And for the first 15 years, the majority of what you pay is going towards interest on that house. So the bank gets their money back. The bank is guaranteed to get their money back. After 15 years, the majority of the money is principal on the loan until you pay the loan off. By the time you get to the last 5 years on the loan, you're paying almost nothing in interest because the interest has already been paid back. But it's a fixed amount. If they structured student loans the same way, rather than charging you compound interest like a credit card, this problem would go away tomorrow. You would take out a $100,000 loan from the bank for your student loans. You'd pay your 10%, and the most you'd ever pay is $10,000 on that loan under that situation. And the problem of never-ending payments doesn't come into play. The problem of paying $100,000 more than the $100,000 that you were charged for your education goes out the window. That's what they should be concentrating on. They shouldn't be concentrating on trying to give you $10,000 towards your loan. That's not going to solve the problem. Because the problem is you owe that money to somebody, so the government's going to give you forgiveness. Well, the government has to pay that somewhere. So where's the government? The government's not a for-profit organization, right? They don't sell, lemonade. They don't have a lemonade stand somewhere where they're making money. The money comes from the taxpayers.
Right.
So their entire income is us. So if you're not paying your loan, someone's paying it, and it's the rest of the American taxpayer. And that's why it's very difficult to convince somebody who doesn't have student debt to pay for somebody who has student debt. What they should be doing is they should be changing the way the student loans are structured. They should be capping the interest payments on there. They should be capping how opportunistic these loans are.
And how easy they are to get.
Yes. If you did that, you could solve this problem. Until then, you're shining a turd here trying to make something pretty out of it.
Now, I will put on my tinfoil hat here. You mentioned that this really isn't fixing anything. But for people like me that are important for a Democratic president that may be running for re-election soon, this would be a great reason to get a vote for him, right?
Well, you are. And that's a good point. So he's buying your vote. That's
Right.
really what this is. The problem is that the demographic that you are, the number of participating voters in that demographic are disproportionately smaller than the number of senior citizen voters, the ones who are going to be on the hook for paying that back. So that logic is valid, but the practice itself doesn't work because the numbers don't work out.
Yeah.
Because if you could get more people your age to get out and vote, it would work. But we can't. The voting percentage of people in your demographic is like 15% or something like that.
I guarantee it's going to be even lower.
Right. Where the voting percentage of people 65 and older is like 70%. So that's not going to work out in your favor, even if he is trying to buy your vote.
Yeah, you're not buying enough of the vote.
Right.
He should repay, he should make it like an elder care bill or something.
Right. But if you fix the problem and you fixed how student loans were financed, it would work for because it won't cost the government anything at that point. You simply write legislation that says how you have to conduct your loans, and you then enforce that legislation. And people who don't abide by that legislation, you impose a fine on them, and the government has another source of income without paying for loans.
So why do we think what's stopping them from doing this restructuring? It seems pretty simple.
It is, but the problem is you have to get both parties to agree to it. And they can't agree to the color of the sky at this point.
Yeah, especially even if they want to, because it's from the other side, they're not going to do it.
Exactly. Joe Biden could propose legislation that would solve world peace and guarantee food on the table for every human being on the planet, and the Republicans would oppose it because a Democrat proposed it.
And they'd call it woke too, probably.
Right. And like it's not our responsibility to create world. And you'd get stupid arguments like that.
Yeah.
When it's like, why can't these idiots just do what's right for the country and what's right for the citizens? They can't, because if it makes the other guy look good, then in turn it makes them look bad.
Right. When in reality it doesn't. It's we should all be in this together. We all live here.
Right.
But
I mean, you look at the parties now going into the primary, both parties are tearing at each other's throat, telling you why you shouldn't vote for the other guy of their own party.
Which is contributing to voter apathy, which is why people don't want to vote.
Exactly.
I maybe we'll make this another episode maybe, but like I was always of the mind that you should always vote no matter what, and I'm really being convinced like maybe not. Like I don't know who we're gonna have in the presidential election coming up, but it's gonna be tough for me to like pick somebody, right? Like, and I know we go with the old lesser two evil arguments, but they're both pretty bad, or they both probably will be pretty bad. And I don't know. Like I said, we could make another episode, but it's the first time in my life since I've been able to vote, this will be my 5th year, because I'm 23, I guess 24 by then, or 5. But yeah, it's really a struggle. It's like difficult, and I understand that voting is important and that you should always vote. But on the other hand, it's like I feel responsible for who I vote for.
And that's the thing. Most voters go out there. So there's a large chunk of voter that votes along party lines because their parents did, and they'll never change. And they're kind of locked in. There's a certain percentage of those. Then there's the kind of people who are easily swayed, the kind of people who hear one argument, don't do any research, and go do their thing. They're the uninformed voter. Then there's the informed voter. They're probably the smallest percentage out there. They're the ones the politicians are terrified of. Because if you're smart enough to go out and do your own research from multiple sources and draw your own conclusions, you terrify politicians. They want mindless lemmings out there that they can tell you who to vote for, and you'll just go do it. And if you vote along party lines, you're the ideal candidate. They don't have to say anything. They could go out there and kill people in the streets, and you'll still vote for them.
Yep.
That's what they hope for. And if you're informed, and the one thing that we try to do on all of our podcasts is to educate and inform people, enlighten people. Don't listen to what I'm telling you. Don't listen to what we say on the show. Go do your own research.
Yep.
If I'm wrong, come back and tell me that I'm wrong about something. I'm happy to hear that, and I'm willing to have my point of view changed if it's legitimate. But don't just vote. The politicians go out there, you have to vote. It's important. Go vote.
They guilt you into it.
Right. But, as a citizen, it's your job that's the one duty that you have is to vote. But what they're really saying is vote for me.
Right.
And voting is important because it's the only way that our kind of government continues to exist. So I totally advocate people vote. But when you're voting, if you're voting in your local election or your school board or something like that, understand the choice that you make affects you. You may not think who's in Congress affects you, but I'll guarantee you it does, because the amount of money you pay in taxes and the amount of money they take out of your pocket is something you can control by who you vote for. And if you vote somebody in this time and they don't do what you want, or you don't think that by the end of their term you're better off, or if you are worse off, vote the next guy in. And then vote the next guy in. Keep doing that until you teach them that you're in charge. Mm. The first thing the politician wants to do when they get into office is get reelected. That's their number one priority. It's not you. It's not their constituents. It's not the people that contribute to them. It's to get reelected. And they're never going to vote term limits on themselves. The highest office in the land has term limits. Politicians, Congress, Senate, they'll never do that. We have the power to do that. If you don't let incumbents get reelected, you're imposing term limits. And even if the guy gets in and you like him, vote him out. And vote the next guy out. And vote the next guy out. Don't let him get entrenched. Don't let him get in there. Don't let him create a power base or start to influence things or anything. That you've got people now, and I'm going off topic obviously here, but it's important to discuss. You had Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell gets up there the other day and does a presser, and something in his brain hits pause right in the middle of it. Now, I'm not saying this to be mean or facetious or anything. It was very clear the man had some kind of health issue at that moment. But they walked him off the stage and brought him back a little bit later after they did whatever they had to do to fix the wiring there so he could finish what he was saying, so he could pretend like he was still okay. And that was just so they could keep power. That's what they're doing. They did the same thing the same day Dianne Feinstein.
Was that where they told her to just say I?
Just say I.
Yeah.
Because she was completely oblivious as to what was going on because she was so far gone.
We see it with Biden all the time, too.
Yeah. And, you know, this isn't a crack on old people or mental illness or anything like that. But there comes a point when you're no longer effective at your job.
Right.
And when you get to that point, I used to unload tractor trailers for a living. And when I hurt my back, I couldn't do that anymore. So I knew I had to change careers. I had to go do something else that was not impactful to that. And I did. Had I kept doing it, I wouldn't be able to do my job and I'd get fired. You can't allow people to stay in power who can't do the job.
And unloading tractor trailers is much lower stakes than running the country.
That's true. That is true.
And that's the part that scares me is like you have these people that may not, and it's okay, you know, when people get to a certain age, you might not be all there.
Absolutely.
But that you shouldn't also still have the same amount of power as you did when you were fully lucid.
Right. You know, they talk about Reagan when he was in office, where he started having onsets of Alzheimer's. And do you really want someone who's suffering from a disease like that to have his finger on the nuclear button?
Yep.
Like, you have to do what is right. You have to have some moral sense of right and wrong to put your foot down in these times, or at least have the gumption and the class to step away and say, look, I can't do this anymore. I'm not up to it anymore. I can't do it the way that it needs to be done. Let a younger person come in and do this type stuff. We as the voter have the power to do that.
The more you know.
Anyway, that's it for my soapbox for there. We're going to run over time here, but that's okay. We're going to come back with our last segment here and talk about religion, free speech, and gay rights. That should be a quick one. We'll be right back.
Insights into Teens, a podcast series exploring the issues and challenges of today's youth. Talking to real teens about real teen problems. Explore issues from braces to puberty, social anxiety to financial responsibility. Each week, we talk about the topics concerning today's youth. We look at how the issues affect teens, how to cope with these issues, and how parents, friends, and loved ones can help teens handle these challenges. Check out our video episodes on youtube.com/insightsintothings. Catch our audio versions on podcast.insightsintoteens.com or on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to Insights into Tomorrow. We are still covering the Supreme Court's recent decisions after a brief aside.
Sidebar into politics.
Yeah, but we're back, and this is our last point for today. Religion, free speech, and gay rights. That's a lot, but we're going to do our best. The 6-3 decision, which turned on the court's interpretation of the First Amendment, appeared to suggest that the rights of LGBTQ people are on more vulnerable legal footing, particularly when they're at odds with claims of religious freedom. The ruling was the court's latest in favor of religious people and groups, notably conservative Christians. The Supreme Court sided on Friday with a web designer, recently. The Supreme Court sided recently with a web designer in Colorado who said she had a First Amendment right to refuse to design wedding websites for same-sex couples despite a state law that forbids discrimination against gay people.
Justice Neil Gorsuch. Is that Gorsuch?
I have no idea.
I'm not very good with
Neil.
names. Neil. Justice Neil.
I'm sure he loves to be called that.
Writing for the majority in a 6-3 vote, said the First Amendment protected the designer, Lorie Smith, from being compelled to express views she opposed. Quote, 100 years ago, Miss Smith might have furnished her services using pen and paper. Those services are no less protected speech today because they're conveyed with a voice that resonates further than it could from any soapbox.
Yeah, I read this. I was reading the show notes before the show. What? I don't understand what that means. Like, what is he saying?
Basically, he's saying that because it's something that's being done on the internet and has a wider reach, it's no different than if it was a printed material.
Okay, gotcha.
The case, though framed as a clash between free speech and gay rights, was the latest in a series of decisions in favor of religious people and groups, notably conservative Christians. At the same time, the ruling limited the ability of governments to enforce anti-discrimination laws. The justices split, surprisingly, along ideological lines, and the two sides appeared to talk past each other, kind of like politicians tend to do. The majority saw the decision as a victory that safeguarded the First Amendment right of artists to express themselves. The liberal justices viewed it as something else entirely, a dispute that threatened societal protections for gay rights and rolled back some recent progress. This also comes at a time when transgender people are facing increased discrimination at the local and national level, with the American Civil Liberties Union stating that there are currently 492 bills in the works around the country that would directly harm transgender individuals.
And this goes back to what we're talking about with this backsliding that we're feeling, right? This is another example of that. Using the Constitution as the weapon. In an impassioned dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor warned that the outcome signaled a return to a time when people of color and other minority groups faced open discrimination. It was the second time this week that the justice summarized her dissent from the bench, a rare move that signals deep disagreement. Appearing dismayed, Justice Sotomayor spoke for more than 20 minutes. Quote, "This case cannot be understood outside of the context in which it arises. In that context, the outcome is even more distressing. The LGBT rights movement has made historic strides, and I am proud of the role this court recently played in that history. Today, however, we are taking steps backwards." A Colorado law forbids discrimination against gay people by businesses open to the public, as well as statements announcing such discrimination. Ms. Smith, the woman who owned the website, who has said that her Christian faith requires her to turn away same-sex couples seeking website design services. I'm sure that's probably in the Bible. Jesus probably has a Squarespace page. Seeking website design services has not yet begun her wedding business, nor has she posted a proposed statement on her current website about her policy and beliefs for fear, she has said, of running afoul of the law. So she sued to challenge it, saying it violated her rights to free speech and the free exercise of religion.
So, you jumped on my point too quickly there. So, okay, first of all, there's nothing in the Bible that is anti-gay, anti-LGBTQ, nothing like that. There are no teachings.
There's not? I thought there was.
Nothing.
I'm not even joking. I legitimately thought there was about like
not
men.
a single mention.
Oh.
There are stories about same sex. There are instances of it occurring in there. Nothing is ever preached against. In fact, if you go by the teachings of Jesus, Jesus says to love all men, to love all people. So there's nothing in there. How the court could even use that as an excuse, number one. Number two, I'll guarantee you there's nothing about websites in the Bible, okay? Maybe the new King Charles Bible there might be, but there's nothing in the King James Bible or before it that has anything to do with it. So that's a falsehood.
And that makes sense why Justice Neal had that quote that he had, because you have to frame it so it's legitimate.
Right.
And not a bunch of baloney.
So, and the other problem that I have here is she's not being forced to express opinions that are contrary to her beliefs. She's being contracted to produce a website for someone else. If she didn't like fur coats and she made a website for someone selling fur coats, nobody would confuse her as being the person selling fur coats. Mm-hmm. So using that as logic for why you can't produce something for someone else is bogus. So there isn't a single argument in this case that has a leg to stand on.
But it worked.
But somehow the conservative Supreme Court decided to latch onto this with as flimsy an argument as it was to set precedent again. And that's exactly what it is. That is how dangerous this Supreme Court is, and that is how broken this Supreme Court is that they took something that was so... It shouldn't have gotten past...
It's like a Judge Judy case.
Right. It shouldn't have gotten past TV court.
Yeah.
Okay? It was literally that weak of an argument. The court decided that was important enough to listen to.
And to create such strong precedent.
Right.
Which makes you wonder that they could do it with anything, right? Like,
the Supreme Court receives hundreds and hundreds of cases a year to hear. And they go through and they cherry pick the ones that they feel are the most important, the most impactful, and the ones that are the most influential on the Constitution. And they pick this steaming pile of crap as one of the ones that they wanted to talk about.
it's pretty tough to not argue there's an agenda when this is what they go with.
Exactly. That's why it was vitally important that we talk about this one.
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed at our Supreme Court for even listening to arguments on this case. It's that bad.
Right. And it's like, if you actually look at the case, it is just gay people trying to exist. And when you look at a lot of these anti-LGBT laws or anti-trans laws, it is just people trying to live and maybe get married. And it's like, it's always framed as if they have this agenda, like they want to take over the country, the LGBT people.
Indoctrination.
Yeah.
You got to throw that in there,
It's
too.
a bunch of baloney, man. Like, it's these people are just trying to live and be treated fair and equally, but that's just not allowed.
No, and the worst part is the state itself had already passed legislation that prevented this.
Right. So move.
Now, the problem that I have, I have several problems with this. The other problem that I have here is this Constitution says any laws that the Constitution does not explicitly cover fall to states' rights.
Yep.
There's no anti-discrimination law in the Constitution. So therefore, if the state has a law that governs it, the state should take precedent. The Supreme Court should have had no jurisdiction over this case whatsoever because of that law that was on the books.
Yeah, should have been done right down there.
So it should have never even gotten to the Supreme Court.
But when you can politicize anything and you can make an agenda out of it, because now it becomes an issue of the First Amendment, which isn't that the one about free speech? First Amendment?
Free speech and freedom of religion.
Yeah. So, but it's...
So how does her freedom of religion trump the other people's free speech by having a website?
Right.
Someone needs to explain that one, too.
Yeah. Yep. It's pretty tough. No matter what side of the spectrum you're on politically, it's pretty tough to argue that there is not an agenda here. Especially this, it's good we ended with this, because this is like the standout.
It's the smoking gun.
Yeah.
Not only is it an agenda, it's a poorly thought out, poorly researched, and poorly executed agenda.
And a hateful one.
And it's blatant.
Yeah.
It's like the expectation that Americans are stupid is written into this agenda, because you're not supposed to see this stuff. You're not supposed to pay attention to it. Supreme Court rule. They're supreme, so it should be okay, right? Only we're overturning other Supreme Courts, so it's really not supreme. It's kind of the okay court now.
Yeah.
Just do as we say, though. That's the hypocrisy that our country is dealing with today.
Yeah, and it goes back to that. We talked about the feeling of regression and the feeling of legalized discrimination. And again, we mentioned this a lot. But if you're an audio listener, we're two white guys, so
right.
It's really not impacting us that much. I can't imagine what it must be like being a transgender person or a member of the LGBT community or a minority or a woman. Like, there's just so many people out there that are, and I'm not laughing. I'm laughing because it is so horrible, right? I'm not laughing to make light of it.
Right.
I'm laughing because it is just, it's really bad.
And that's it's literally so bad that you don't need to be a member of the community to see how blatant this is and how wrong it is. That's how bad it is at this point.
And it's not even hidden. And then they have the Republic Republican side of this, they tend to like put the blame on the other side of like, oh, well, they're the ones that are trying to take all the power. They're the ones that are actually trying to brainwash you. When in reality, that's just not true.
Right.
It could be in some way, but not nearly as much as the right is doing.
Right.
I just don't know how you can see that and just act like, you know, if you believe in these far right conservative Christian ideas that, like, you know, that you're the minority in this, like.
So I'm going to get insulting here for a second because I just can't make my point without being insulting. So the people that are doing this, the far right politicians and radicals that are doing this, are so blatant and so callous and not well thought out that their argument requires stupidity to believe, are doing that because the vast majority of people that support right-wing politics are stupid. They're people who don't want to think for themselves, don't want to do their own research, blindly want to follow somebody who they think is the next coming of Jesus, and generally are religious fanatics.
But they think that they are smart because they have backing like this where they're being legitimized.
They think they're smart because the people that know they're stupid keep telling them they're smart.
Yep,
Okay.
and that they have all the answers. You have to. I hear this a lot with what I do for a living. Okay, they say, "Oh, you can't trust the Democrats. You can't trust the liberals. They're trying to brainwash you. But you can trust me. I have all the answers." And I'm like, you are no different than if they actually are brainwashing you on the left, because you're doing the exact same thing. You're delegitimizing everything else, but you're saying you have to listen to me. I have all the answers. You can trust me.
Right. They can't provide proof or evidence or a logical argument, so their way of arguing their point is to attack the legitimacy of the other guy.
And it's working.
It's fake news. Don't listen to it. It's political sabotage. It's a witch hunt. It's never me.
Right.
You've got a former president of the United States with like 50 indictments against him right now.
And he said he's going to run from jail.
And it's not him. It's everybody else.
And it works.
But it doesn't take a genius. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to look at this and say, you're delusional.
Yeah.
Like it can't be that.
Yeah.
But the problem is their supporters don't see logic.
And though it's like when, you know, we talked about earlier when we got on our little aside about voting, right? The types of voters, the people that will vote on party lines. And now you have that with this far right, that they're going to vote. Like, you know, when Trump said he could shoot somebody and get away with it, he was right.
Right.
Like,
exactly. He literally got up on national television and bragged about inappropriately groping a woman.
And then got elected.
And got elected president. They'll vote for him no matter what.
And then they'll do it out of spite.
He gets indicted for violating espionage laws. And he gets $1 million in donations the next day. He gets indicted. Did he get indicted yet for the other one?
I have no idea. We can do another episode on that.
There's so many indictments. It's hard to keep score at this point.
Yeah.
But every time he does something wrong, he gets more supporters.
And if he does go to prison for something, I think it will guarantee that he gets elected. Like it's like the kingpin.
Well, fortunately, there's 2 indictments he's under that if he gets elected, if he gets convicted, he cannot hold public office.
Oh.
Well,
then the Supreme Court will just say that, you know.
Then the Supreme Court will reinterpret the Constitution,
Exactly.
I'm sure. So anyway, that's where we're at.
That's the show.
Anyway, yeah, I mean, we don't even have to summarize. It's literally that bad at this point. Before we do go, though, I want to take a moment to push the right button here, which I just did, and invite you to subscribe to the podcast if you don't already do so. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Tomorrow. You can find video and audio versions of all of our network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things. We're available on Pandora, Castro, Podbean, Buzzsprout, pretty much anywhere you can get a podcast these days, but not Stitcher soon. So Stitcher's going away.
Rest in peace, Stitcher.
I would also invite you to contact us. Tell us how we're doing. Argue with us. Tell us we're wrong, that we don't know what we're talking about. I'm take anything at this point in time.
The liberal check is in the mail.
You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. We're on Twitter at insights_things. You can find us on Twitch at twitch.tv/insights into things 5 days a week. If you have an Amazon Prime subscription, you do get a free monthly Twitch Prime. Throw that our way. We'd appreciate that. Or you can get links to all these and more on our website at www.insightsintothings.com. That's it. Another one in the books.
Stay safe, everybody.
Bye.
Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow, where we take a deeper look into how the issues of today will impact the world of tomorrow. From politics and world news to media and technology, we discuss how today's headlines are becoming tomorrow's reality.
Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow. This is episode 20, Don't Touch That Dial. I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and my co-host today, Sam Whalen. How you doing today, Sam?
Good. How you doing?
Fantastic. So this topic kind of came up when I was doing some research on various things that we could talk about. This one kind of hit home, mainly because of what you do. What is it that you do that's tied to this topic?
So I currently am a producer at an AM radio station. I run the board for a bunch of different shows 3 days a week. I also would like to break into the FM market at some point. That's sort of my goal. Went to college for it, did radio in college, did radio in high school. Radio is my passion, and it's what I want to do for a living. This topic was important and something I think about too often.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the resume there. We'll make sure we get
no
that
problem.
out to
Yeah,
everyone.
check out my website.
So, the article that I came across happened to deal with current automakers like BMW, Tesla, Audi, Porsche, and Volvo, all taking steps to remove AM radios from their electric vehicles. And it made me think, and it's making a lot of people think, what's the fate of this aging but reliable form of communication? And that's what we're going to discuss today. But before we do that, I did want to take a moment to invite our listening and viewing audience to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Tomorrow. You can find video and audio of all the network's podcasts listed as Into Things. And we're pretty much anywhere you can get a podcast these days: Apple, Spotify, Google, and so forth. I would also invite you to write in and give us your feedback. Email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can find us on Twitter at insights_things, or you can find links to all of our social media at www.insightsintothings.com. Shall we get into it?
Let's get into it.
Let's do it. So there's one particular article that I read was on a site, northjersey.com. And they kind of talk about the fact that it's no secret that AM radio has kind of lost much of its luster over the decades. It was introduced in the early 1900s, and it's lost out to superior technologies, FM being the first one that threatened it, satellite radio, and now we're talking, podcasts and streaming and YouTube and everything you can get over the internet now. In fact, that's one of the things that these car companies are saying, is that everything that you could get over AM, you can get over streaming now in the car. which I guess is a valid point as long as that infrastructure is working, right? AM has been traditionally relegated mostly to talk shows at this point in time. And again, that's because of the limitations in the technology. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with AM and what the limitations of that technology are and why people might be wanting to move away from it?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if you listen to any AM broadcast, you're going to hear it immediately. The difference between AM and FM, the sound quality is just much lower, and that has to do a lot with how it transmits its signal. It limits itself essentially, but because it's so simple, it's effective in more rural areas and areas where you might not have the high-speed internet you would need for streaming services. But again, because of those limitations, we are mostly talk. Because anything more complicated, you just wouldn't hear it because it's, as it's broadcasted, it's all garbled, and talk is the only thing that really can come through effectively. But yeah, it's kind of a miracle that AM is still around. I think even as someone that works at an AM station, it is definitely, it feels like a relic. And when you bring it up to anybody, you immediately they're like, it's dated and it feels dated. But there is still a market for it in areas where it's not as populated, where it's easy to get an AM signal. We do have people that call in still. We do have listeners, even with those limitations. So,
well, and that's the technology itself doesn't lend itself to high fidelity broadcast, stereo, or all the new fangled high grade music and stuff that we do now. But what it is, it's reliable and it transmits very far. It doesn't, because of the frequencies that it operates on, it's not as susceptible to interference with, objects, Wi-Fi, for instance. You run Wi-Fi in your house, and if you have drywall in your house, that can interfere with your Wi-Fi signals because of the higher frequencies.
And weather too.
Yes, that's one thing. But I will say that from a weather standpoint, it's interesting listening to AM radio in a thunderstorm because every time there's a bolt of lightning, you can hear it over the radio.
Yep.
But it's exactly that reliability that resulted in it becoming really America's backbone for our national public warning system, which is one of the paramount reasons that people are trying to preserve it now, not just, for talk radio and such, but a large chunk of our emergency broadcast system is done over AM radio. In fact, our government is still trying to preserve this. U.S. Congressman Josh Geitheimer thinks we can't lose AM radio. He says AM radio is resilient to cyber attacks, nuclear threat, and natural disasters. He goes on to say that when cell phones go out, the internet gets cut off, or television doesn't work because there's no power in your house, you can still use an AM radio. It'll still be there.
Yep.
And that's true. I mean, people have hand crank AM radios for emergency weather services and natural disasters and things like that. How significant do you think it would be if AM went away and we lost those forms of communication? Would it be a public health hazard?
I think it definitely could be because, I mean, when all else fails, you would still be able to turn to that. Everybody, even if they've never tuned to AM on their car or radio before, you can, and you would still be able to get that information. If that goes away, there really is no no like last resort that you'd be able to go to get that information. You could, we get government warnings on our phones, but if there's some kind of electrical malfunction, your phone is dead. And there's no cell service, no internet service. You're not going to get those alerts. TV broadcast, you see emergency alert system tests on TV all the time. But again, if power goes out or if the TV networks go out, you're going to lose that service. AM radio, it's pretty hard to shut it down unless you destroy the transmitting towers because no matter what, it's going to go out. And like you said, you can get a hand cranked radio to always get that signal. So I think it would be, it seems like a really low chance that we'd have to use it for something. But if we did and we didn't have it, the consequences would be pretty rough.
Well, and, I'll take us back to when 9/11 happened. I was working up in central New Jersey, so most of the radio and TV stations that we had pulled from New York. And when the first tower went down, it took one of the major transmitting stations for all the television networks down.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and because it was mounted on top of the tower, because it was the largest structure in the city, and we lost all of the antenna service that we had at the time. We didn't have cable; we had antenna service, and obviously it's a time that everyone's kind of scared, not knowing what's going on. So you're looking to get news. Well, all the internet sites were hammered at the time. You couldn't get anything. In fact, the only internet news we could get, we had to go to European sites to get that, and they had, spotty reporting at best. We had someone who had an old 9-volt radio in their desk that they would listen to on their break. And they pulled that out, they pulled up an AM news station, and that was how we kept in touch during 9/11. So it's not that unreasonable to think that it's that important. And it's, the whole reason this topic came up was because of the auto industry kind of pushing the issue itself. But that's not really the driving force behind this, but it's the reasoning behind the auto industry's move away from AM is sketchy, I would say at best. What are the reasonings that they have for moving away from AM?
So I'm looking at the show notes. I'm just trying to make sure we covered the right parts. We already covered the issues, but yeah, the real issue is deeper than car makers trying to modernize their products. This is from Forbes magazine. 40% of all radio listening is done in cars, which is great for us and the radio side of things because you're guaranteed an audience. A lot of, like when you do ratings and stuff, you can't guarantee an audience, but radio, you can kind of cheese the numbers because everyone's got a radio in their car. Even if they're not really listening, it's on. So that counts when it comes to ratings.
Sure, yeah.
If the auto industry turns away from AM, losing